Welcome to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid. A set of conversations about our government, our politics, and the kind of country we aspire to be. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath, on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Welcome, everybody. It is another beautiful Saturday here in the upper Midwest. Oh my gosh, we have so much to be grateful for. And mostly it's each other. I mean, America, we took a hit this month. We took a lot of hits this month. Let's review. Outrageously, the Supreme Court allowed large parts of the old Confederacy to deploy racially discriminatory maps to make sure that, large black populations of their states do not hold political power. That is unthinkable. And Donald Trump this month dealt himself a $2 billion fund to pay vigilante insurrectionists in advance of the upcoming elections, also unthinkable. Trump's Iran war has left that rogue nation stronger and badly undercut American power and prestige across the world, and he seems paralyzed to do anything about it. We are so diminished that when Russian drones took out a building in Romania, a NATO country, no U.S. official even had a comment. That's disgraceful. This month, the consequences of Trump's terrible leadership are visible everywhere, in skyrocketing prices that we pay for everything from gas to food to rent, in outbreaks of measles and a mishandled Ebola cases, in crashing consumer confidence, in the vast chasm between the reality Americans experience and the fairyland of Trump-branded $250 bills, fountains, reflecting pools, triumphal arches, and the ballrooms that we hear about every day from the president. I know, and I share with you the sense of betrayal we feel when our own government is turned against us, when our country is pillaged by greedy men whose oaths were lies. But if we turn from them and look instead at us, what wonders there are. Take pride in our bold resistance. Take pride. I mean, Donald Trump came to office this time prepared with a plan, and he executed that plan. And in the early days, major corporations fell. So did big media companies. Many law firms decided their profits were more important than the rule of law they swore to uphold and fell in line. Many universities thought their grants were more important than the freedom to think and became docile. And no betrayal was worse than that of the Republicans in Congress. And yet, we didn't shrink. Tens of millions of Americans, by the way, including many federal judges and people called to sit on grand juries, we wouldn't be intimidated or bullied or cajoled or entertained or distracted from our perennial mission to create a more perfect union. Look, we showed up on the streets in Chicago. In Minneapolis, 2 Americans laid down their lives to defend our country from our misbegotten government. This week, Donald Trump was ordered not to disperse any money from his vigilante fund. A court reopened that case to consider whether it was simply a fraudulent deal. Another court ordered Trump to remove his name from the Kennedy Center, which, by the way, led to an epic meltdown on Trump's part. I mean, maybe later, if we have time, I'll read you some of it. It's almost funny. This week, an ICE officer was arrested in Texas and remanded to Minnesota for prosecution. All of this is progress. This is us pushing back. This is us taking on the biggest threat that America has ever faced and winning. Donald Trump's political party, the vestigial remains of the GOP, it is in free fall. No amount of money can save them from the beating that's coming. No amount of cheating is going to overcome the margins of their humiliation. Texas, that bastion of right-wing power, is in play. And look, we may not win there. We might, though. And the truth is, they're going to have to spend a fortune defending it. This battle is on their turf. And I know a cornered lion is dangerous, but at least he's cornered. Now let's finish the job. Donald Trump is throwing himself, he's throwing himself a huge birthday party, right? And, for his amusement, a giant cage is being constructed on the White House lawn for a show fight. And he can't get people to entertain. They lied to people to get them to sign up to sing. And once they found out that this wasn't the American birthday party that Congress authorized, but a private Trump event, something that he took the money from the holiday the government was planning and to have his own thing. And they said no, they walked away. And again, he had a meltdown. And he can't get people to come. So now he is offering to pay soldiers to show up. And they're trying to corral soldiers to be his audience. But of course, he only wants soldiers who have that certain look, strong arms, good posture, white skin. What a loser. What an unbelievable loser. So while he is in his little bigoted party on the White House lawn, the rest of us are going to go to another No Kings celebration. Because there's a big one planned on June 14th, that same day that he's having his cage match. And, we show up, we come in all sizes, shapes, and colors with all varieties of faith and all sorts of political notions. And we come as we are, not as props for a spectacle. Our America is the one that we have always been, a fabulous multitude determined to build a future together. That's who we've always been. And we've, over time gotten better at it. And then we've had this setback, but we're going to overcome it. Because even if the rich and powerful fail us, and they have, oh my gosh, they have, Americans, look around and see what we have done. See what we did on the streets here in Chicago. See what courage showed up in the bitter winter in Minnesota. Everywhere you look, Americans are making it clear. You see it in poll numbers. You see it in grand juries. You see it in courtrooms. You see it in protests in red parts of the country and blue ones, in rural America and in big cities. Everywhere. Everywhere. We are pushing back. So on June 14th, while Trump and his paid audience watch a cage match at the White House, where this morning Donald Trump said he would be the entertainment because, after all, he's the greatest entertainer in the world. That'll make everybody want to come, right? Americans will turn out everywhere else to celebrate the country we love. And by the way, there's a huge concert planned in New York where artists are showing up, great ones, and that'll be available to everybody. It'll be streamed everywhere. And we're going to remind ourselves, and by the way, the world that needs this reminding, that even if our government is captured, Americans will never shrink from the fight for our freedom. Not ever. I am really proud of all of you. I'm really proud of our country. We have faced this terrible, terrible threat. And I told you, Donald Trump used last year to consolidate power, and we used it to learn how to fight back. And he was at the peak of his power, a few months ago, and we are fighting back. And we are winning. Now, there'll be more casualties. He's going to ruin more lives. He's going to steal more money. God knows what he's going to do in Iran, and he better do it quickly because the consequences are devastating for the world. Fool. But we aren't being distracted. We are gathering together and gathering our strength. I read Walt Whitman. I mean, he has a great poem about elections. He talks about America and all the fabulous things here. From the Grand Canyon to the mountains to the oceans, nothing is as awesome as when the people come together and direct this nation. We're preparing to do it in November. We're already working at it, and we are working in the ways that we can between elections to stop their nonsense. So bravo you. I have a great show today. Stay with me. We're going to take a quick break. And then I'm joined by Victor Ray. I'll introduce him when we come back. He has not been on the show before, so this is a real treat. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. Victor Ray is the kind of hardworking scholar that gets appointed to multiple departments. He's a professor in the departments of sociology, criminology, and African American studies in the University of Iowa. He also works as a non-resident fellow at the Brookings Institution and at Harvard's Kennedy School. Victor, thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, we have a ton to talk about, I know your research is around race in America, and I want to
Right.
spend some time on that. It's like notably one of the most important topics ever, and once again, one of the most relevant in this moment. But
Right.
before we get to that, I want to talk to you about higher ed.
Of course. Yeah, let's start there.
The conservative revolution led by folks like Chris Rufo and the sainted Charlie Kirk has succeeded in making some structural changes to American higher ed. I think one of those showed up at your university, that
Right.
so-called Intellectual Freedom Center. So I'm wondering if you could talk about that and tell us about that.
Right. So the Intellectual Freedom Center is a new addition to the University of Iowa. I believe about a year ago, the state legislature bequeathed this center $1 million operating budget in order to combat the supposed left-wing bias of higher ed, right? So since William Buckley's like 1951 God and Man at Yale, it's been sort of an article of faith on the right that higher ed is hostile to conservatives. And so they opened this center, supposedly a center of intellectual freedom, but only for the opening event, only the Republican legislators were invited. No Democrats were invited. And then the sort of inaugural speaker was the person you just mentioned, Christopher Rufo, who was paid $34,000 to come, in my opinion, speak propaganda about higher ed. And, the goal of this center is allegedly to sort of diversify the ideas that are in the classroom or in higher ed. But I think if you bring a person like Christopher Rufo, who is frankly entirely unqualified, typically outside speakers have, PhDs or experts in their area. Rufo is not an expert in his area. And his only sort of qualifications is helping to destroy the new College of Florida, where he was appointed a trustee by Ron DeSantis. And since his appointment, the new college has purged faculty. It's purged a president. Its budget has ballooned. They've hemorrhaged students. And their ratings in the new U.S. News and World Report dropped precipitously, right? So I wrote about this in an article in MS Now, but I think this is a wider issue in higher ed, that lots of universities are sort of, buying the propaganda that higher ed is not a place in which all ideas are debated.
Okay, so Chris Rufo, one of them, I get to say things that you may not be comfortable with, and forgive me if I do. Chris Rufo, one of the most intolerant of all Americans, is an expert at what he does. What he does is try and purge, particularly Black women, from the ranks of faculty all across America, purge curriculum that has ideas that celebrate diversity from universities wherever he can, and celebrate this sort of thuggish control that puts politics over thought at universities, as it is in every fascist country that ever was. That he is an expert at, and he's
Right.
proven to be quite good at it.
So I think you're making a point here. So I wrote a book on critical race theory, in which I talk about what Chris Rufo is doing.
Hold on for 1 second.
Yeah,
I just, having heard that, you wrote a book on critical race theory.
yeah,
We now have an administration that thinks if you put critical race and theory in the same sentence, you're like you've committed a felony, right?
right,
I
right.
mean, they view that as an act of overt racism, just to say those words.
Just to say those words, yeah,
Just to say
right.
those
So
words. So,
the,
first,
it
before you even get into what you think about it and what you study about it, how does that feel?
oh, for me, so it's so I'll say it does not feel great. But one thing that I'll say is if you study the history of race and racism in the United States, you're kind of not surprised by people like Christopher Rufo, right? So there has always been a strain of sort of bad faith, dishonest uh, hustlers who use race to divide and try and destroy institutions. And let me also be really clear, create a sort of like anti-democratic movement that disenfranchises people of color, right?
Yeah.
And so, one of the things that I write about in the book is I'm just like we've seen this before, right? So abolitionists were targeted and attacked for expressing their ideas. During the civil rights movement, Black speakers were kicked off of campuses when, they occasionally upset the powers that be. And so one of the things that I say in my book is, critical race theory points to these points in history and says like, we can expect them again. And so I try and analyze what Rufo is doing through that lens. And you made the point here about sort of the anti-democratic nature of this. And I think it's important to note that, one of Christopher Rufo's um, sort of credentials is that he went to Hungary to study under Viktor Orban's institute to sort of seed right-wing anti-democratic ideas around the world, right? And
Hmm.
so a lot of what we're seeing him do here is authoritarian practice that we see anywhere authoritarian movements are trying to disenfranchise and disempower specifically marginalized groups. But, the destruction of democracy ultimately impacts everyone, but it is specifically targeted at, racial minorities, gender nonconforming folks,
Hmm.
and yeah.
Hmm. Well, so um, it comes not just with their rhetoric, it comes with some structures. This institute that they put on your campus is now an institution funded by the state for the purpose of addressing a grievance that doesn't really exist, and serving a purpose of I don't know what. I mean, I'm not sure what it actually accomplishes for them, except diverting money from other research. And
So
maybe
there,
they have a thing they want to accomplish. I'm not sure they will.
Right. So I think that there's a couple of points that you're making here, right? About the structural change that they're trying to do. And this is another long-standing conservative sort of strategy that, the Koch brothers did with institutes at universities for a long period of time in order to seed sort of like libertarian ideas. So they're kind of updating that strategy. And I think that they have a number of goals. One is to try and cow people like me or folks who are studying race and gender and ideas that they don't like. So when you introduced me, you said I'm in African American studies, and that used to be the case.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But I left because the University of Iowa closed the African American Studies department along with the Women's Studies department, supposedly because of budgetary concerns. And this is important, budgetary concerns, and supposedly because we didn't have enough students in our classes. So, in the first semester, and I think the first semester, in which the institute that Rufo is supporting started teaching, They had one class that had, I think, about 18 students, and they had another class that had to be canceled because only one student uh, signed up for that class. And
But they
so
get a state appropriation.
but they get a state appropriation. And if this was about sort of, the number of students in your classes, then they would also be facing closure. Instead, there were bills in the past legislative session to sort of mandate students take classes in Western civilization in that institute, right? And so forcing students mandatory classes in an institute that's supposedly about freedom of thought. Um, so I think, yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
listen, I mean, the Southern Baptist Convention in the United States was not a right-wing organization when I was growing up. I'm an
Mm,
old man. It was started in the 70s. There was a long, concerted, real campaign um, that involved infiltration and purging of dissent and gathering
right,
control of communications in league with one of America's political parties because they thought they could use the issue of abortion to do it, and they succeeded in turning
right,
a religious, mostly a religious institution into a political weapon. At the same time in American history, they were figuring out how to capture the Supreme Court.
right.
And succeeded in doing that over time. And now they want to do that with higher ed.
Right. So I think you're making a really good point here. So this is a beachhead, right, to do that. And just like, in the McCarthy era and other times in US history, they're looking to capture the institution. And one thing that authoritarian movements really hate are sort of independent sources of information, right? And so
Absolutely right.
and so that's why you see the Trump administration and folks like Rufo go after the media and sort of create their own media environment. And they want to do the same thing with higher ed, right? And so part of it is to, purge people like me, but part of it is to hope to control the narrative, right? And so one of the things that I think gets lost in this sort of like abstract notion of intellectual freedom is that universities are already better, perhaps the best institution in the United States at presenting ideas that are a broad range of ideas, right? So I just talked about, maybe to a fault. And so what I mean by that is um, universities will even platform people who don't think universities should exist in their current form, like Christopher Rufo, right? And so on the one hand, they're railing and saying, no one will listen to me while they're being paid $34,000 to come and say, I should destroy the livelihoods of everyone at this university who disagrees with me,
And they
right?
point to a few universities. They don't,
Right,
like I don't see, there are plenty of young conservatives in higher ed in America. I
correct.
mean, and by the way, I think, Roll Tide is, I mean, I like the football team. I like the school. Auburn is also a great school down there. The South has plenty of great well, unless they're going to wreck them, they have some pretty great universities. And a lot of conservative Americans find home in institutions all over the country that they're happy to be there. They don't
Right.
feel but if you're, so higher ed is diverse in America, and they focused on that edge of the diversity they don't like, which is
Right.
what
So
they've done in the broader society too.
this is a really important point, and that's that the whole premise that conservatives are somehow not welcome on campus is just false. So in the
Have they
op-ed,
been to a business school?
I
Yeah,
have, yeah.
yeah.
The business school, engineering, but I went to in the op-ed I wrote for MS Now, I cited a Gallup and Lumina Foundation poll that found that only 2% of students on college campuses nationally feel like they can't state their ideas, and only 3% of conservatives feel unwelcome on campus, right? That is an astounding level of agreement in a highly polarized country, especially for conservative students who've been told for more than 50 years that they aren't welcome on college campuses,
Yeah.
right? And so they're going to college campuses, having a different experience, meeting professors like me and feeling welcome, and then, reporting to Gallup and Lumina that they feel fine. So the entire premise is in service of institutional capture, right? Of getting control of the institution so that people can't push back.
Well, so looking across the country, how successful have those efforts been in the last, 10 years or so?
How successful have those efforts been? So I don't know of any national data, so I'm going to speak anecdotally, right?
Sure.
Um, so last year I was a fellow at Harvard. You asked if I'd ever been to a business school. Last year I was a fellow at Harvard Business School for the year.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean,
And
Chris Rufo managed to purge them of a president.
right, managed to purge Harvard of a president, and there was a palpable sense of chill among faculty I spoke to there. Right. I'm at the University of Iowa, and I already said that, African American studies has been dismantled and women's studies has been dismantled. So there is a palpable sense of chill among many of the faculty in those departments. There's a number of other schools in which this has happened. So there's a sort of takeover, dramatic takeover of both the Florida system and the Texas system. A few months ago, I interviewed a faculty member in sociology at in Florida, Zach Levinson, and he talked about this textbook that the state had basically said not a single existing sociology textbook on the market complies with state law around race and gender and what can be taught. So they created their own, they took an open access textbook and, with sort of state permission, they just eviscerated the textbook and they took basically the sociology out of the sociology textbook. Very little race, very little gender. They also took out climate stuff about globalization, and they said this is the state mandated textbook that people taking intro to sociology are allowed to teach from in the state of Florida. Um, in Texas, there was a philosophy professor. This was widely reported. I think it even made it to the New York Times, but I might be wrong. That there was a philosophy professor who ran afoul of state law for teaching Plato.
I
And,
saw that.
and
I saw that.
and so he resigned. He resigned in protest. And again, sort of about the hypocrisy of folks like you, Rufo, and his team, is they claim to be representing Western civilization and Western culture, and they're banning Plato. Like how more sort of hypocritical and yeah, just anti-intellectual can you possibly be? I think I'm gonna do a brief digression here. I think it's important to know that Rufo worked for the Discovery Institute before he became who he is now, and that the Discovery Institute were one of the people who pioneered in the 90s the notion of what did they call it? Intelligent design. So
Mhm.
they seeded public schools. They started attacking public schools for teaching the theory of evolution, and their goal was not to overturn sort of the biological consensus, right? The consensus among biologists that the theory of evolution is real, but to sow enough doubt in the public's minds that people would be unsure. And I think Rufo has really taken that strategy and sort of amped it up with his crusades against race and gender and those sorts of
Yeah.
issues.
Well, and as we know from climate change, people can be made, enough of the population can be confused about the scientific validity of something to be confused.
Right.
All right, and now I'm going to go on a digression because higher ed is an enormously complicated topic. So we've talked about one strand of the right wing that has attacked higher ed for its diversity of viewpoints and for I don't know what's happened to this camera that's following me around, um, for its diversity of viewpoints. But there's another one that says higher ed exists to train workers for our workplace.
Right.
And they are in league in some of this in this moment here,
Right.
because really, what do gender studies have to do with the job that you're going to have unless you find yourself in a department teaching about that in the world to come? Why don't we just teach people, how to code, or how to be good in the businesses they're in? And there's a whole lot of money behind that point of view too. And
Right.
and it's the same money that's behind a lot of the social attacks on higher ed.
Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right. And I think, I am in the tradition of people like Dewey that thinks about higher ed as creating citizens, right? Creating sort of whole people, not just economic inputs for the system at the moment. But I would also say that I've had a pretty diverse experience in higher ed. I started at community college. I went from a community college to a small liberal arts college, Vassar, and then I did my PhD at Duke. And so those are very, very different
Very different schools.
institutions, right?
Yep.
And one of the things that happened in the transition from the community college to Vassar, I was like, oh, they're training me very differently here. At the community college, they were training for workers. And part of that was structural. I was in classes with a couple hundred students, and the professor does not have time for the kind of individual attention to students. And then I moved to Vassar, and I was in classes with 4 students reading sort of the classics of
Again, that speaks to the diversity of higher ed in
right,
America.
the diversity of higher ed in whatever
Yep.
tradition. But I think, this is a long-standing debate, even among educators, about what we should be doing. But I am strongly in the camp that you should be educating people for the most sort of like broad understanding of humanism, but also that education will best prepare people for the workforce because they will be adaptable, because they will be able to learn new things. But also, they'll probably be able to challenge their manager, and folks don't love that.
Yeah, I worked part of my life in higher ed, and I helped a university that was interested in humanities and interested in teaching people, as you are describing, end up with better enrollment in than engineering schools in countries that value engineering more, by saying, you go there, you get a job. You come here, you'll get a promotion.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah. So it was, like I said, it was very clear to me when I got to Vassar after a semester or two. I was like, oh, they're teaching people to be in charge.
Yeah.
They're not teaching people to just go to work.
All right, so let's turn from higher ed now to the subject of your research.
Sure.
You know, not that long ago, you were writing about like rates of incarceration and other topics that a healthy society talks about when it aims to be both safer and more just.
Right.
Now you're like back talking about voting rights and as if we're in the twilight of Reconstruction in the 1870s. Like, what do you make of this moment?
Oh, this is a really interesting question. What do I make of this moment? So I think this is I mean, I'll just say, I think that the US is entering a kind of new racial era, right? So I've seen, and I've written about this. I've written, and a number of colleagues about the resegregation of American institutions, right? So some of the things that you've seen the Trump administration do sort of on his first and second day in office, he repealed a Johnson era executive order that covered 25% of the American workforce, all federal contractors, and said, it was an anti-discrimination order. And he said, we don't need that anymore.
Hmm.
It's sort of 70% of the opposite, the lawyers at the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department have quit. Um, and so 600,000 Black women have left the workforce since or been forced out of the workforce since Donald Trump took office, right? And so the overturning of affirmative action, the sort of all-out assault on immigrants, the rejection of HB1 visas, the sort of targeting of international students in higher ed, all of these point to a kind of resegregation of American society. And so, and then, just what, 2 weeks ago, the overturning of the Voting Rights Act, which some folks have said is going to lead to the sort of biggest drop in Black representation in Congress since Reconstruction, as you talked about, right? So there is, in one sense, a reversion to a kind of race hierarchy that we've seen in the past in the United States. But I think what's new to me are two things. And one is that there's this sense that how they're doing it is oftentimes through the very bureaucratic mechanisms that the civil rights movement put into place to protect people of color, right? So I don't know if you saw the EEOC came out, the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission came out and said, we're looking for white men to sue for anti-white discrimination.
I did see
right?
that.
And so those are civil rights laws, right?
Yep.
If you look at how they overturned the Voting Rights Act, it was the 14th Amendment, right, which was passed following or 15th, right? It was using laws designed to protect minorities and people of color against their intended purpose. And
Yes.
so there's a way in which the victories of prior progressive movements have been sort of co-opted and undermined and turned against progress, right? And so on the one hand, there's reversion. On the other hand, there's a kind of racist innovation.
Okay, so that describes what the administration is doing,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
But America's a big place, and we are bigger than our government. So given, I mean, this isn't 1870, and we
Right. Right.
had a black man as president of the United States, and we have a thriving black middle class, and we have um, much more experience with each other in all our diversity than we did even 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think this moment may not last. I think there's a popular revulsion to it, and I'm wondering if you start to see that. I mean, I live in Chicago. When the ICE guys showed up here with their Black Hawk helicopters, nobody asked what party you were from when you took to the streets to say, get out of here.
Right.
Right. And there were a lot of people who got, I want to say radicalized, but got involved for the first time when this isn't something they had cared about before.
Right.
And they did it in part to protect their neighbors. They also did it because Americans don't like being pushed around by armed thugs in our neighborhoods. And the lessons we learned here got improved upon by the fabulous outpouring in Minneapolis,
Right.
which cost two Americans their lives. But
Right.
I didn't. I mean, I think about the 1870, the Colfax massacre, which you would know about, right?
Right.
Um, I think we're in a different time.
So I do think we're in a different time, right? And so another way that I think, it shows that we're in a different time. I think that the moral force of the civil rights movement and the movements came after remains like sort of undiminished, and many Americans still subscribe to it, which is why I think they have to lie so much, right? So they're often like, even the Supreme Court decision overturning the Voting Rights Act was like, this is a race neutral decision, right? And because they know that if they're open about their goals in the way they were in, say, 1870, that it will be rejected out of hand, right? And one of the things, I'm working on an article right now arguing the reason that they haven't tried to just overturn the Civil Rights Act, but rather weaken it at a bunch of different points, is because they know that it's popular. Right? Like even folks like Rufo, who think it should be overturned, recognize its popularity, and they don't know that that's a political battle that they can win. So I do think things are substantially different, and which is why I think that the Jim Crow 2.0, I think it's a powerful rhetorical device, but I think we need to start describing what's happening now with new language, because there are important differences, right? Now, that being said, I would also think about what worries me. And what
Hmm.
worries me are the structural changes that are very difficult to dislodge, right? So, Supreme Court reform, right? We're not going to get sort of progressive legislation upheld with the current makeup of the Supreme Court if we're trying to reverse these things, right? And so I think, movement strategy needs to think about sort of the levers. And I would say, they built this edifice of, sort of emergent American fascism over about 50 or 60 years. And I think a lot of us who are opposed to this need to start thinking sort of similarly long term. I think a lot of times, not always, and definitely not among necessarily movement folks, but sometimes I think progressives are like, we passed a law or we got a new policy, now we can move on to the next thing. And I think what this reversion shows is that like some folks are not going to stop fighting for racial hierarchy, and we need to continue to uh, be ready to push back on that.
Oh, I am convinced we are more than ready.
Oh, good, good.
I mean, I want to ask, like, across America, there are places that in the South where
Right.
the people were enslaved.
Yeah.
They call them plantations, and they open them up for weddings because they're beautiful places. Why we don't call them slave camps is an interesting question in America because I think people would think about them differently.
Right. Right.
Well, maybe we start doing that. I
Right.
think that we should call things what they are, and not let people lie about what they were.
Right. So I have, and again, I said a number of other people have too, have written about the administration as being segregationist. And when I did that, I got some pushback. Well, what do you mean they're segregationists? And I'm like, well, they're overturning the policies that integrated American society. And they're not using the language of the 1960s, but they are pursuing policies that will accomplish that goal. And so I think it's fair to call them segregationists. So
Well,
yeah,
look
I
at their
am
cabinet. I mean, it doesn't reflect America. It doesn't look like
right,
America.
right. So I
Anyway,
am I am a big proponent of calling things what they are. Um, with the caveat that like it is important to like use language people can understand and get behind, and so you do need to think about messaging, but that doesn't mean you give up sort of like your core beliefs about calling things what they are.
yeah. All right. So you've talked about the structures that they put in place a little bit, um, and let me ask you to think about why they didn't try and destroy the Voting Rights Act um, differently, because I think you gave a different answer a minute ago. That it's not politically tenable now is one answer. That they
Right, but
figured
so
out how to use it for their own purposes is a different answer.
right, so I mean, they were clear in the decision that we're not overturning the Voting Rights Act, right?
Right. We are just
Um,
using it for a different purpose.
we're just using it for a different purpose. And so I think I don't know if I made a different point. I think I made a very similar point about what they're doing with the Civil Rights
Hmm.
Act, right?
Okay.
Is they're
Yep.
using civil rights law to say actually it's white people who are discriminated against.
Right.
So to be clear, the empirical evidence on this is 100% white people are much less discriminated against, if at all, in workplaces, schools, those sorts of
So
situations.
let's speak to that because I hear from young white men who are having trouble in this job market. And they are told, well, you can't have the job because it's reserved for somebody else.
Okay.
And I say to them, maybe you didn't get that job and because you weren't the one, I mean, that could get that job, and that's what somebody told you. But who did get the job?
Right.
I
So I
don't know.
think I think there's two things here. One is So I do think that young white men are told that. I think young white men have been told that since the 1960s when the Civil Rights Act was passed. And I actually think even before that, if you look at sort of some, union and labor struggles, there were sort of unions, white unions that barred black folks who were like, they're going to take our jobs, right? And so
Yes,
this is a
there's a
long
very well
standing
documented history.
documented history. The other thing that I'll say to that is except for a brief period of about 2 years over the last 50 years, the black unemployment rate has been double that of the white unemployment rate. And so, yes, there are young white men who have trouble getting jobs in this marketplace, and especially good paying jobs, right? I have no questions about that. But there are about twice as many young black men who have trouble getting good paying jobs. And if you look at, there are quite literally decades of audit studies in which they send black men, black women and white women who are equally matched out to apply for jobs. And the evidence shows that since 1989, like black discrimination against black men in hiring has been like relatively constant, and that whites have had an advantage. So I
It's true
do
for
not
home
want to
buying as
say,
well.
excuse me,
It's also true for home buying.
for home buying. It's true for home buying. It's even true, I have a friend at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign who's done a whole host of these on like trying to get into the club, like trying to get into clubs. And black men are turned away for supposed dress code violations at much higher rates, right? Car buying, these studies have been done with car buying.
Hmm.
There's just a ton of evidence. Seats in restaurants, there's a ton of evidence um, that the disadvantage is towards black folks in particular, but people of color more broadly.
And,
So
and,
again,
and it's not just in getting opportunities, but as you point out, the job losses in the last couple of years have
right,
impacted Black America far more, Black men, Black women, and Black men
black
more than
women in
anybody
particular,
else.
right. So
Well, maybe not everybody else because the immigrant community is just being rounded up.
right, but there's a long-standing saying of, black folks are last hired, first fired. So last hired in sort of economic upswings, first fired in economic downturns. And yeah,
And the data bears that out again.
the data bears that out again. Yeah. And
Mhm.
so again, I don't want to, so I never want to minimize sort of anyone's economic insecurity, right? Like as a progressive person, I think economic insecurity, regardless of someone's racial background, is like a very serious problem that needs to be addressed. But within that, I think, we can do a both and, right? We need to recognize that, like, yes, and some groups historically and presently have had greater degrees of economic insecurity because discrimination directed against them. And then I would say, the sort of all out assault on DEI and getting rid of affirmative action recently has also disproportionately impacted people of color who were often in those jobs, right? In sort of um, diversity management jobs or HR jobs.
Hmm.
So,
And what about men and women in college? Used to be more men, now it's more women. Um,
right.
it,
What are you? What's the
I just
question?
you like is this a not when I hear from these young white men, they think that that is also evidence that somehow they're being mistreated.
But how
Yeah,
how are they
they
being
just look at
mistreated?
the number. They just say we were more, now we're less.
Oh, we
Because
were
it's
no
something
more,
happened.
now they're less. Yeah, so I don't know the causes of gender inequality in higher ed, but I think there's an interesting thing here in which for decades, when people of color would point those kinds of things out, the response was like, just work harder.
Right?
And so who we're willing to accept a kind of structural analysis from is interesting.
That's a very
I
good
would
point.
I would also say I would say that part of the I think one of the reasons that the attacks on higher ed are so effective right now is probably because of more women and people of color being accepted into higher ed,
Yeah.
and folks saying that is
And-
evidence
Yep,
of
yep.
sort of discrimination. I guess the last thing that I would say here is that even with that, if you look at sort of like returns to higher ed or who's ending up sort of in management positions or at the top of workplace hierarchies, it's still men, right?
Yep.
Right. So men, even though women are outperforming men in higher education, men are still ending up at the top of
Many of these organizations. Yeah.
many of these organizations.
All
Yeah.
right. So we only have a few minutes left. I want you to sort of think about all the studies you've done, the data you've consumed, and talk about what is the inoculation. What is it when you see a moment like this one that's akin to the 1870s, different from the 1870s, but it has those overtones of we made some progress, now we're like going the wrong direction. What is the thing that gives us resilience?
Oh, so collective action. So,
I love that answer.
so yeah,
Organized people beats organized money.
right. So I think there's a few things. So I get this question a lot, like, what do we do? How do we push back? And I think reading the history of Reconstruction, reading the history of the Civil Rights Movement, um, I gave the answer collective action, but collective action with the recognition that you don't know what's going to work. And so you got to experiment. You got to try lots of things. You got to make alliances with people who you might agree with only 80% and accept that for this one issue, you're going to get together and you're going to work together. You're going to agree to disagree on however many other issues that you disagree on, right? And so in the civil rights movement, there were so many organizations that were working for, I would say broadly like multiracial democracy that were just fighting amongst themselves. There's
And common cause was made between folks who cared about civil rights in the 1960s and folks who were opposed to the Vietnam War. They
Right.
didn't even have the same issues at all, but they
Right.
found common cause.
They found common cause, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think collective action. I think another thing that is I'm speaking of like the Democratic Party here, not the left. Is one thing that the sort of Trump era has made clear is that they are ruthless and they are willing to spend political capital to accomplish the goals that they want to accomplish. And I kind of wish, I don't know the Democrats, but the left needs that kind of ruthlessness to protect
Coming.
people.
I can tell you from being part of that world, it's coming.
It's coming.
There are guys like me who think Mar-a-Lago should be the next Smithsonian Museum of American Fascism, and we should
Right.
make it happen.
Okay.
And it's kind of a joke, but Robert E. Lee's house is where we buried the people who put him out of business.
Right.
Right?
Right.
That's Arlington Cemetery.
Right.
And we've done it before. We need to take the fascist symbols away from them.
I'm all for it. So, yeah.
I hope he builds the arch. I do, the triumphal arch, because we can get rid of America's deficit by just telling everybody for $10 you get a swing at a sledgehammer until it's gone.
Oh,
And
right,
there
like
will
the
be a line
Berlin
from
Wall.
Washington to San Francisco to do it.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, like the Berlin Wall. I remember it coming down and just the celebratory hammers.
I have a piece of it here.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
That's cool. That's cool.
Well, look, thank you for your time. If people are interested in this topic and want to find your work, other than an occasional piece at MSN, where can they do it?
So I've written a bit for Liberal Currents. I was writing for the Emancipator for a while, and then I'm on Blue Sky. So yeah.
That's right. I really appreciate your time, Victor. It was a lovely conversation.
Great meeting, and thanks for having me.
You bet.
Okay.
All right, everybody, we'll be right back.
Welcome back to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody, come on in. It was a great treat to be able to do this, to join Ahmed Baba. You guys all know him. Come on in. I see you're coming in. Thank you. Um, Ahmed is, of course, a journalist and a political analyst. He publishes Ahmedabad News, which I think some of you are watching this on right now. Yes, I see those hearts. That's great. Um, uh, and publishing, as I said the last time we talked, publishing on Substack means writing and doing video and doing all kinds of other things. So it's a full service media operation in, I think we called it last time, the truth to power beat.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
it's good,
yeah.
good to talk to you again.
Good to talk to you too. I'm really glad we're doing this live. To see you all coming in. Welcome. I see some familiar faces coming my usual scheduled lives.
Yep.
Hello, hello.
And
Welcome.
I just should say, for those of you who are hearing this, talking about scheduled lives, was a conversation we are having Friday. It will air again Saturday on my radio show on WCPT in Chicago. So if you're on the radio, this background stuff not important to you. We'll get to the meat in a second. All right. So I'm Edwin Eisendrath. I host It's the Democracy Stupid, both on Substack and on Lincoln Square. And it's the name of my radio show on WCPT in Chicago because it is the democracy these days, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
Let's just go. Let me ask you this. I want to start, I guess, last weekend was Memorial Day. Last I checked, Americans, who fought and died for our country didn't check a partisan box before they did that. And when they jumped in a foxhole with their neighbor, they didn't ask, like, what party are you from? But Donald Trump sent out a message on Memorial Day. Now it's a week later and it's still bothering me, and I wonder if you read it and what you thought about that and because we're going to move to talk about our 250th birthday. But if he can't get through one Memorial Day, I don't know. So, like, what did you think about that?
No, I'm glad you start with this because I really think it's worth noting and kind of emphasizing the pure depravity of Trump. Like he keeps stooping to these lows and insulting dumbocrats on Memorial Day and not specifying lawmakers, generalizing effectively an entire group of people who affiliate with this, who definitely died. There are many Democrats who died for America and fought in these wars. And really, it's just when I see these things, and then I saw another thing that was notable about it is I saw Fox News read the post as if it was a normal post when they did their broadcast. And it's like, for me, it was just another incident where there is this normalization of just a desecration of the office, a daily desecration of the office normalized here by Trump enablers. And it just, the president's supposed to be the best of us, not the absolute worst. And every day, a totally innocuous, totally random day where he could have just done something nice, another holiday. He could have been like, hey, let me actually just rise above the fray here. And instead he chose once again to lean on his worst impulses. It's disgusting.
Does he have other impulses?
It's a good question because I don't think he has any.
So what we're seeing are all bad ones for sure. So yeah, right. So I raise that because now he wants to be the master of ceremonies for our 250th birthday.
Yeah.
And let's be clear. This is not the 250th birthday of the United States. The Constitution and the creation of this nation didn't happen for another, it happened in 1789, not 1776. 1776 was the anniversary of our independence. And it was the anniversary of telling the world that all people are created equal and have rights. And this administration seems determined to erase the idea of rights and the idea of equality.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. I mean, what he's doing, and that's why it's so depressing that he's the one that helms this 250 anniversary, that he's the one in office, because it could have been an opportunity to take stock of all the progress we've made, to take stock of the fact that we started and the founders did not abolish slavery at the founding, and we had a really flawed beginning, and that we've made gains, and instead we're marking this with a backlash and an eroding the fundamental foundational principles that the founders did. They created a framework for us to pursue our freedom, as flawed as they were. And we've made a lot of progress. And instead, we've talked about in a previous conversation, just this attack on the federal workforce, which ended up harming Black unemployment, the attack on DEI, the attack on fundamental civil rights. It's just, he's very clearly representing the antithesis of what not only the founders believed, but of every civil rights era the what LBJ, what the people in the best moments of our history embodied. And he's really just it sucks that we have the worst president in history, in my opinion, helming the 250 celebration, while he acts like he's America first, but it's all about him, and he's eroding our principles here, man. And it's like it's about him and his birthday and putting his face on the $250 a new $250 bill. I guess now he wants to put his face on.
Right. I
Like,
mean, you're absolutely right that he's the wrong guy to talk about our history. He's the wrong guy to celebrate the progress we've made, but he's also incapable of showcasing the fabulous, diverse, interesting, fun, brilliant country that we now are, right? And I know with sadness that it has to happen and complete happiness that it's happening, that all these artists who signed up to celebrate our 250th are saying, wait a minute, what? I thought this was the nonpartisan thing that Congress created. That's
yeah.
not what this is. This is some Trump party. And they're saying, no, not doing it.
Yeah, no, they're saying no, not doing it, and it's the right approach, because I'm glad you talk about the diversity and then like the beauty of America, because like you're right, he's the wrong person to talk about it, because he's been trying to erase that history of that progress,
Yeah.
and he's part of this attack, this assault on multiculturalism generally. We're the most successful, if not the only, like major multicultural democracy that exists, where it's like the whole premise was this blend of religions and ideas and people and backgrounds. And then their whole assault with Vance, with his blood and soil speech. Trump also, when King Charles visited, talked about the British blood running through, like all this ethno-nationalist eugenics stuff that's running through this rhetoric, this white nationalism that they're trying to embody transnationally, with the Atlantic and the Reform Party in the UK use similar language, where it's just like, we are a multicultural society, and there's so much to celebrate. We like, especially, I live in New York, you're in Chicago, right? And it's like, we are there. There's havens of multiculturalism. We can get food from anywhere. We can engage with people of all backgrounds. And instead, they want to assault that. And the interesting thing is, they want the benefits of the multiculturalism without it. They'll go to a Trump rally where he's saying get them all out, and then afterwards they'll go to a Mexican restaurant, right? Like, it's just unbelievable, man.
I changed my language, and I want to get your thoughts on this. Um, I don't talk about a multiculturalism anymore,
Hmm.
um, because uh, because
Yes,
American
that's
culture is this vast, wonderful, diverse place. It has all these different strands in it, all these different traditions in it, all these different flavors in it. So I just think, wow, American culture. If we talk about multiculturalism, they can say, yeah, well, it's a buffet, and I can take these three items and leave the others aside, and that is just not so. That's not who we are. We are all of this, right? And and
yes.
then and then you go back to, you know, um, I'm going to go to a tradition that's not my own, to St. Paul, who says, like, if you get rid of the hands, what's the stomach going to do, right? You got, like, we all have to be part of this tradition for it to be the culture that we are.
Yeah, honestly, I'm really glad you frame it that way, because you're right. It is American culture. That's
And
what
it always has
it
been.
always has been, and
Always.
that's what they're attacking. It's not it's not just multiculturalism generally. It's American culture at its fundamental essence. They're lying about the history of America and acting as if it's this white Christian nation and that's all it's ever been. When in reality, as we know, this country was built by slaves, and the black community especially is such a big impact on music and culture and everything
Enormous
that's happened in
contributions in every aspect of our lives,
every
in
aspect of our
science, in art,
lives.
in entertainment, in literature, in politics, in every aspect of American life. Right.
Exactly. And yet they want to diminish that and act like it
Diminished.
would, and diminish it entirely, and act as if it was not a fundamental foundation of America. And I think you're right. It's an attack on
Yeah.
American culture. It is
Yeah.
it is fundamentally anti-American.
And by the way, when the rest of us got here, there were already people here, right?
There was
And
Native
so, like,
Americans.
America was multicultural from the moment somebody from Europe
Yeah.
put a foot on this continent.
Yes, exactly. And then exactly, and other immigrants came in, and then they were persecuted at first. I mean, whiteness has really expanded beyond what it initially was. There was Irish and the Italians that were initially faced discrimination. So it's like we continue to welcome people here, and it's a positive benefit, and that's why I think Democrats need to do more is speak to the benefits of this American culture, of this immigrant welcoming culture where undocumented immigrants pay $100 billion in taxes annually without getting benefits, right? They increase the economy. They help. They commit crimes at lower rates than even native born Americans. Like all the lies about immigrants are false. And I just think like you're this. I really agree with your framing here that it's fundamentally American culture that Donald Trump is assaulting, and it's unfortunate that he's doing it and now trying to act as if he's celebrating the 250 years.
Right. That's exactly right. Okay, so that's our framework. That's who we know. You and I know who we are, right? And
Yeah.
they don't. But together we're a lot stronger. Donald Trump decided to not pay attention to anybody else, not ask Congress that represents the rest of us, but decide all by himself to go to war in Iran.
Mhm.
Um, and when you hear him play like "Let's make a deal," you know, wait, we have peace. No, I'm bombing them. We have peace. No, I'm bombing them. Wait, we have a deal. The Straits of Hormuz are open. No, they're not. Well, I control the Straits of Hormuz, but Iran has to open it, right? Earlier in his presidency, people might have said, well, this is a genius at strategic ambivalence, leaving himself room to move. But I think we're not at that place anymore. I think America now looks at this and just sees a guy who has no idea what to do.
No, that's spot on. I mean, they try to claim, oh, it's madman theory. Well, if there's no theory, you're just left with a madman, right? Like, what are you doing? And it's like it's this whiplash that he's created, this back and forth where he's negotiating with the voices in his own head, and it's like, where does that left us? Right now, the deal that's on the table is effectively, which it wouldn't return to a pre-war because that status quo is ruined now because of the attack, but it's to solve a problem that was created by the war itself, opening the Strait of Hormuz, which was open on February 27th, the day before the attacks. And now, even if
And
they
by the way,
were,
Iran did not have a nuclear weapon either.
and Iran didn't have a nuclear weapon either. And it's like, and they're not even talking about enrichment or missile capability in these talks. This is from what I saw in Axios, a deal potentially to return to the table to start talks, which were already happening when he launched the initial strikes. So now I'm seeing Scott Jennings and some Republicans trying to claim victory here as if this is like a great deal. It's like, even if the strait was reopened now, the damage from it, as many economists have talked about, will be long lasting. It's going to take a long time for some of the people of the Gulf nations who stopped production to revamp up some of the oil production. Oil prices are going to remain high for quite a while. And on the other side of that, you have a more extreme Iran. You have who's realized their leverage, and they have a stronger deterrent than a nuclear weapon, which is to short circuit the global economy whenever they want. So we're left in a more dangerous world
Yeah,
because
we
of
handed
this.
them this new weapon, right? So there's no circumstance where the United States ends this where we are better off than we were before. There is no circumstance where Iran, where the regime in Iran isn't more difficult than before. I mean, the damage they took militarily is huge, right? But they're there, they're entrenched. We lost the opportunity at regime change, which we might have had when the old man died, but we killed him instead and made a martyr. Um, and or Israel killed him. It's hard to know. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, that part of the world is complicated. And I worked there for many years. It's a complicated part of the world. And you have a simpleton in the White House who just sees the world as, let's see, there's them and there's me, and I can push them around. And that's not how
Yes.
the world works. And the world, I mean, Americans, including the Republican Party, hasn't figured out how to stand up to this man, but the world has. And,
Mm-hmm.
and America's worse for it.
Yeah, no, spot on. And I'm glad you bring up his simpleton nature because he lacks any intellectual curiosity. And when you don't have that, you can't understand the enemy. How can you negotiate or deal in war if you don't understand the fundamental mechanics of the Iranian regime? He thought he could just go in there and just Venezuela it. And then it's like, no, you took out Khamenei. And even if you took out the son, you have the IRGC, which is now significantly more empowered. the you know, and they're decentralized structure for the most part at this point. So if you take out some generals here, you've got others that'll take power. They have a structure in place, so you can't just wipe out. It's a hydra. You
It's
can't
a
just wipe
huge
it out.
country. They've proven, I mean, they lost what, 1 million people fighting Iraq. They've proven that they can take pain to keep their regime alive. Um, and a little bit of history would have helped, right? But instead, he tore up the deal that kept them from getting a nuclear weapon. Now Iran is a troublesome country for sure, and dangerous, and but there are ways of dealing with it, and there are ways of dealing with it, and this one is not helped. This one's proven to be a failure.
A
But
hundred
for these
percent.
guys on the right, the only thing that matters to them is identifying an enemy. It doesn't matter if they're effective in beating the enemy. It doesn't, because their politics is all about identity, which brings us back to where we were before. Like, you're either in my tribe or you're not. And if I can just be mad at somebody outside of it, I can keep you voting for me. The problem is that he's so incompetent as a president that um, inside the tent or outside the tent, you're paying high gas prices. Inside the tent or outside the tent, you're
Mm.
paying more for food, or you can't find a rental apartment that you like, or job market is a pain. All of this is true because he's a terrible president.
Exactly. Yes, and it's like when at this point, his lies are so see through that you can't create enemies when everyone sees through what you're talking about. You try to make Iran an enemy, which of course Iran is a repressive regime that most Americans would agree should
We
fall or
don't like
change
him.
place, or we don't like them, right? But at the same time, we all know why we're here is because Trump infamously tore up the Iran deal. And the JCPOA, Trump's own State Department in 2018. They said that they were complying with it. All of this enriched uranium they have now is post-Iran deal ending.
All on
So
Trump's
it's
watch.
all on Trump's
All
watch. So Trump created this problem, and then he keeps, and then now he wants to. And then you're not articulating what the goal is, or even directly outlining who the enemy actually is. When you're just going all over the place. 1 second. Oh, it's a regime change. We got a new regime. We're going to work with this new regime. Next second is we don't know who the regime is. We actually don't want to work with them. Next second, we want the Strait of Hormuz open. Oh, but we don't need the Strait of Hormuz. And then they lie and say, oh, we actually eroded all their missile capability. We find out 30 of the 33 missile sites across the Strait of Hormuz along it. Iran has access to them. They have access to 70% of the mobile missile capability, mobile launchers around the country. Like, it's just, I can't, like, I've tried to be, okay, let me see if there's any objective way. Let me take out my personal feelings. If there's any way that this war that we're up, that we've gained anything. And I cannot, for the life of me, think of a single way in which America has gained other than the gains at the gas prices for the oil companies.
right. So Trump is going to have to agree to a bad deal because he put the country in a bad place, and he's going to try and have to sell the country a bad deal. And he's a good salesman, but I think that those days are over. One more thing about taking it personally: I worked in that part of the world for a long time. I have a particular fondness for the country of Oman.
Mm.
It is the most beautiful country in the Gulf. It's peaceful. It's friendly. And Donald Trump said he was going to bomb it this week. They don't get in line, we'll have to bomb them. And I am just personally sick of my president thinking the solution to every problem is either locking people up or bombing them or shooting them in the knees, right? This is
Yeah.
his answer to everything. Gas prices are high, let's go shoot somebody. I mean, right? This is not worthy of our nation.
No, it's not worthy of our nation. And then the other day, he's talking about, oh, we'll just blow them up like Oman. Like, come on. Now Oman's catching strays. It's just, you're right. This is not the way to look at it. He has this might makes right worldview where in the first term he was more restricted because he had some sane people around him. And now, his whims are totally unleashed.
Well,
Where
you know this better than anybody because you were one of the first guys who outed Project 2025, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they were working to be ready in the second term to try and destroy our democracy.
Exactly. And now they've got what they wanted. And the thing is, at the first term, the guardrails and the people in power that prevented his worst impulses, they actually saved him politically, but then he used that to blame. Oh, I didn't get to do all my agenda because of the deep state. Well, now he's surrounded by loyalists. Everyone knows it's his show. And there's no fallback here. Everyone knows that this is Donald Trump's unmitigated id. It's his ego unleashed, and Americans can see right through it. And he brags about the bad things he's doing.
He does, yeah.
The
Let's talk about
tariffs. Yeah, go ahead.
So you and I have been talking about how bad he is at governing and how it impacts people's lives. But the other tax on Americans is corruption, because every time they spend money on the reflecting pool in a no bid contract that's way overpriced, right, to line a friend's pocket, that money comes from you and me. Anytime that Donald Trump negotiates with himself and reaches his hand into the Treasury and takes $2 billion for a slush fund, that money comes from you and me. The corruption is not just disgusting on its own, it's an extra tax on all of us. And I want to ask you this, because like I was a Chicago alderman and a bunch of my colleagues went to jail. They went to jail for they took $1,700 to approve a stop sign, that they shouldn't have sold a stop sign for, right, for $1,700. But people were disgusted that a politician would line their own pocket at their own expense, even if it was like $1,700. This guy has taken billions for himself and his friends. Where's America's sense of, do they hate you and me so much, the right wing, that they're willing to overlook that kind of graft?
I think not. I think it's beginning to pierce through. I'm starting to see more and more. Not, and it's not. And I think the indicators are, the influencers are lagging indicator. The MAGA media people, it's because their audience was already starting to move and they needed to speak. It's all they move with the market. So I think people are starting to see, because you're right. It is the most transparent grift in American history. It's a robbery what he's doing. He effectively tried to rob the IRS of $10 billion. And then when that seemed, I guess, a little bit too much, he was like, okay, well, I'll settle with myself for a $1.776 billion robbery that I'm going to give to my cronies. On the flip side of that, you have him making billions of dollars in crypto. You have the sovereign wealth funds in the Middle East investing in World Liberty Financial, his crypto company. You have loans being given to Donald Trump Jr., run fund, $620 million loan from the government given to Donald Trump Jr. affiliated company. And then you have 3,600, this is one of the craziest things to me.
The trades?
The $3,600 trades in Q1, which is talk to any stock expert, they're like, that's a lot of trades for anyone. And then he owned NVIDIA. And while he's greenlighting chip sales to China, he owns Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman, and he owns defense contractors while he's waging a war that benefits and enriches those defense contractors. It is insane. And then, of course, we don't even know who is grifting on these insider trades, where minutes before these announcements, these fake deal announcements, there are millions, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of oil futures that flood the markets. So it's like, I think we're going to be astounded by the amount of grift that are still yet to be uncovered in the future.
Yeah, I think we're getting to the point where, it's all came such fire hose of things that Americans aren't used to, that we're beginning only now to be able to put our arms around the big picture of the whole thing. Because the grift that you just talked about, the economic pilfering of our country, is one piece of it. The disruption of the Justice Department, also corrupt, to make it his enforcement mechanism. This is the stuff that you see in dictatorships all over the world. They exist to keep the boss in power, to punish his enemies, and to line his pocket. And we're seeing him do that in our government. So not that hard to explain. We elected a guy through our democratic process that he doesn't believe in. And he said, I'm going to use that power. I'm going to spend, before I get there, I'm going to have this project. We're going to figure out how we can use the power that these fools give me to make sure they don't have any power ever again, and I get all the benefit. And that's what we've seen in our government. And again, coming to our 250th birthday, that is just beyond appalling.
It really
so
is
whether we have a
beyond
251st birthday is an open question.
Yeah, no, it is an open question. And, that's the right way to put it, because what it is not only he's being corrupt himself, he's raising prices on Americans almost unilaterally with his moves. His big, beautiful bill was one of the largest, probably the largest wealth transfer in American history upward. And then you have Yeah, like people can see through that. They can see him unilaterally raising their prices while giving tax cuts to the rich, while focusing on a ballroom that's also potentially going to cost over $1 billion for taxpayers. And they see that, and he wants to put his face on a $250 bill. Okay, well, you want to be the face of inflation? Let's create a
That's a
larger
good line.
bill.
I'm going to take that line. May I use that? That's a great line. It's a great line.
Yeah,
Although
yeah.
you know what? I would give him the $250 bill and his face on it if it had bars over it.
Yeah, I would buy that one.
Yeah.
I would spend more than 250 on that to hang it up on my wall.
It's like I think he should build the arch so that we could retire the deficit by offering every American for $10 a swing at a sledgehammer to take it down. And we can keep going until it's gone and we'll have no federal deficit.
Yes, you don't need a public works program. People will pay.
We'll
People
pay.
will pay to come and tear down the ballroom and tear down the arch. That's how you raise revenue. That's
Yep.
the way to do it.
Yeah. Well, so we've talked about like who we are and who Donald Trump is, and that they're just not in sync as we go to our next birthday. I wanted to talk to you about the Supreme Court too. That's going to wait for another time because the destruction of the Voting Rights Act is very Trumpian, but it's a slightly different path to the same terrible end. But I'm optimistic. I don't know if you are, and I'm going to take a couple minutes off because while he's consolidated his power in the last year, we've also learned that we have some powers too. Like, tell me your thoughts about that.
Yeah, and you know me because of our last conversation. I'm an optimist, and I have been feeling a lot better. This is not the Trump of 2025. This is an America that sees through the nonsense. The disapproval numbers are insane. He's lost so much ground. He's erased all the gains he's made with Hispanics and the black community. The black community was very marginal, but erased and then some. He's historically unpopular. Young people we see through that. Independent voters, his approvals are in the 20s. I wouldn't be surprised if we see one or two polls have him breach 30, and he's in 29, 28 before the midterms even. And then 2028, we might see W. Bush numbers for this guy. And again, I think a lot of the stuff, it's fear mongering. I agree he's going to attempt to do some interference in the midterms, but I think the way he's behaving, he's very clearly resigned to the fact that his presidency is about to effectively be over after the midterms. A president that cared about the midterms wouldn't say he didn't care about the financial situation of Americans, and the fact he's so focused. Ezra Klein actually made this point in a pod I was listening to right before this, where he was saying like the fact that he's so focused on Republicans and the primaries shows that he actually just wants to control the Republican Party and doesn't really care about like the outcome, right? Like, and I agree with that. I think he's trying to focus on what will happen after he's out of office, and he'd rather just play power broker. And I really think that the American people are going to reject him pretty resoundingly this year, in spite of the gerrymandering.
I mean, shrinking already to a very nasty core, and that's not where America is, and America's going to reject it. I agree with you. And I think the outcome of this isn't just beating Trumpism. It is to go back to where you and I began, a different vision of America, a sort of a more realistic view of how we got to be the people we are and the fabulous things we can all be together. And I think that's where we're going. I think we are going to be in a much better place after we prove to the world that we Americans can stand down threats to democracy at home as well as abroad.
Yeah, that's so well said, and I totally agree. I think maybe Americans need to see this ugly face of authoritarianism to recognize how fragile democracy is, so that we can rebuild it from here and have a more healing approach moving forward. Like we got voices like James Tallarico in Texas talking about this moral, unifying message. We have so many great leaders in the Democratic Party, and in 2028, I think that is going to be a message that I think people are exhausted by this, and we want to come to a better place.
One of the worst men in America is the Republican nominee for Senate in Texas, and he says, "I'm going to win because I'm running against a vegan," because that's how it goes. I thought about that. And James Tallarico is a Texas vegan, and what does that mean? It means he allows a beefsteak tomato on his hamburger.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, all right, it's great to talk to you. I always enjoy our conversation, so thank you so much for your time.
Of course, and thank you. And we're going to do this again, of course. I always enjoy. You have so many insights. You have so many brilliant takes. So I always love talking to you, brother.
You're the best. Thank you.
You're listening to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody, I got a treat for you. Dan Friedman is a senior reporter at the fabulous Mother Jones, based in D.C. For those of you who don't read Mother Jones, you've certainly met a bunch of their reporters and their editor here on my show, and it's really fabulous and important reporting in this hour of need. And it has by the way, it's, as a journalistic organization, it has a great history of being founded in an hour of need and rising to the challenge when we've needed it. And Dan's reporting is great. So thank you, Dan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's the 50th anniversary of Mother Jones this year.
Wow. Well, when? Are you having a party?
They are having a party in San Francisco. I'm not going to remember right now when exactly it is because I'm not planning to attend. But
well, I hope it coincides with that phony party that is Trump's Freedom 250 fund.
It probably does because there's so many events with Freedom 250 that Freedom 250 is holding that something will overlap.
Well, so let's talk about that. I knew that Congress created an organization to celebrate our 250th birthday. And then, and I think it was called America 250.
That's right.
And I just thought, Trump rebranded it Freedom 250 because that's what he does. And then I read your stuff and I found out it's actually a different organization. And then it gets more nefarious from there. So I could talk about this.
Sure. Yeah, Congress created America 250, which is just a nonprofit organization that's overseen by a congressional commission. So the important thing about that is it's not that restricted, but it does have a statutory requirement to have bipartisan events, and it has to report to Congress on what it spends ultimately, and or to the commission that's appointed by Congress, so that they have some oversight over that organization. And there was some fighting. Originally, Trump, when Trump got in office, they hired America 250 hired a series of Trump-connected people. They hired Chris LaCivita, who co-managed Trump's campaign. They hired Brad Parscale's firm to do some tech work for them, and they hired Event Strategies, which is
I know that name.
Yeah, Event Strategies organized the January 6th Ellipse rally, and so they have that degree of infamy, but they continue to get work, and they were hired by America 250 is in one of the ways that I think they were trying to get in the good graces of the Trump administration. But what they did do is not give complete control to the White House, and they insisted on following the law in terms of having bipartisan events and over and dictating to a certain extent, letting Congress through the commission decide how this money was going to be spent. So that didn't work for the White House, and what they did was they instead, after some back and forth over who was going to be the director, they just created a new organization, which is Freedom 250, in December, which is like a month before the anniversary year began, and they had already begun holding events. So very late in the game, and they. In a complicated arrangement, they set up this new organization as a private corporation overseen by the National Parks Foundation, which works in connection with the National Park Service to raise private money for national parks. So that's under the Interior Department, and the White House then took a bunch of the money that had been set aside for America 250 and gave it to Freedom 250, like $100 million for planning all this series of events. And then they also began raising corporate money for them and allowing different large organizations, Palantir, United Airlines, that are seeking stuff from the administration, from Trump, to also give money into. That's another one of various ways they can get in his good graces. And using that combination of taxpayer and corporate money, they are staging these series of events. And so the big one that's coming up is Trump's birthday UFC fight at the White House. People may have seen pictures of they're starting to erect the octagon right in front of the White House or behind the White House. And they're having a IndyCar race around the National Mall. in August. They had a prayer meeting on the National Mall where various administration officials declared the United States a Christian nation. Um, so they're doing stuff like that, and I think the common theme is these things have nothing to do with the ideals of the American Revolution was fought over. They have nothing to do with the Declaration of Independence. They have nothing to do with much of the history of the United States. Certainly, the history of Native Americans, the history of slavery, even immigration. These things are just left out of any historical recounting that happens along the edges of these events. And what they are is just a big party that Trump is throwing literally for himself, in the sense that the fight at the White House is on his birthday, his 80th birthday. So that's how.
Didn't he throw a military march on his birthday?
Yes, on his 79th birthday, he had the military parade in Washington, and he is topping that by the parade in D.C. was nominally celebrating the 250th anniversary of the United States Army, since the Army was created in 1775. But he's now, I think, gone further away from any connection to American history, and is just having this big event on his birthday at the White House. So that is how we are celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence in Trump's America.
Well, it's how he's celebrating it.
Yes, that's correct.
The rest of us have other ideas.
Yeah, and to be fair, yes, there are many events happening around the country that are not sort of tainted by this magnified version of.
So is he robbing the national parks, that fund that was set up and paid for by people who love our national parks, and those private donations that went to the National Park Foundation? Is he not tapping into that money for these vanity projects?
I don't think that they're not using that money that I know of, but what they are using is just regular tax money. Yeah. That I think many of us, and that was appropriated specifically by Congress for a bipartisan, inclusive celebration of the 250th anniversary of the United States that would, be for everyone, for all Americans, and that is not what is happening.
Yeah, I think he's also using our anniversary to try and reshape our nation's capital. Talk about the projects, from the ballroom to the arch to the extra money we just spent on gold leaf. Just talk a little bit about what he wants to do to make our capital, look like Moscow.
Yeah, Trump conceives of himself, and I think he said, he's a builder, and he is using the 250th anniversary as an excuse for a lot of this stuff, and a way of getting money and urgency behind these projects. So they have, they're fixing fountains in Washington D.C. that didn't work, and I would say in some cases that's good. The National Park Service controls a lot of land in Washington D.C. for people who don't know, and a lot of parks that on the mall, but even just around D.C. are run by them, and so they are fixing up various fountains, some of which is great and overdue. But number one, they're using entry fees from national parks around the country that have a lot of deferred maintenance.
That they need to be fixed as well.
Yeah, and perhaps more urgently. There's certainly they're going to make that argument, but
well, let me stop there for a second, so people understand this. So a fountain in DC that is there, but the water isn't running, is not as attractive as it could be, but it's not a danger. But if you don't fix the paths going down the Grand Canyon, people die.
That's correct. Yeah. And they have chosen to prioritize these projects, but not only are they fixing, what are aesthetic issues in Washington, so that Trump can say that they're done for the 250th anniversary, but they're doing a poor job of it, and many of these things aren't going to be done. The New York Times has done a lot of reporting on the reflecting pool, the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool in the National Mall.
The Tidy Bowl, the one they put the little blue tablets in to change
it
looks?
They painted it blue, so it looks bluer. But they gave a no bid contract to a company that was recommended by Trump's a guy who works at Trump's club in New Jersey, his golf club in New Jersey, and they've began the project before they had fully negotiated what they were going to be paid. So they're going to be paid way more than they would have got received, more than 13 million right now, if they had bid the contract normally. But the administration, as along with various other contracts connected to beautification of Washington, said there's an urgent need to get this done because we have to have it done by July 4th because the president wants that, and that is a misuse of a procurement law, which says yes, you can have a no bid contract when there's urgency, but that's usually because there's an actual emergency. You have to rebuild, a flood wall or something in order to make sure that people don't die or, there's not great damage. This is just because the president wants to have a fountain going for July 4th. You mentioned the ballroom, the arch that he wants that's the 250-foot arch that he wants to be the biggest one in the world, bigger than the one in Paris, that he wants to have in front of Arlington National Cemetery, that many veterans are concerned, or veterans' families, will block views of Arlington. And they do not have approval from Congress to do that, even though statutorily they need that. That's what the law says. But they seem to be proceeding on the idea that there's a 100-year-old approval for a different project that they can somehow claim gives them authority to do it. And the list goes on. They're working ahead on the ballroom. People may not know, that people may know that the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. has been closed. Trump, when he closed it, said he was closing it on July 4th in honor of the 250th anniversary of the United States, which is nonsense. It doesn't even make any sense. But it's closed. So, he's reshaping Washington, and he's in the way that he may want to, and connecting it to the anniversary of the United States.
Are Confederate memorials part of this?
Not directly in Washington, but I think indirectly, indeed they are, because, for example, the America 250, before Freedom 250 was created, held an event last year where Trump spoke at Fort Bragg in North Carolina, and he celebrated his plan to what he has already done, which is have the Pentagon rename these various forts named after Confederates back, giving them their old Confederates name back. And in that speech, it was sort of his normal stump speech where he attacks Democrats and says all kinds of terrible things, except it was supposed to be at an event celebrating the 250th anniversary of then the Army in American history. And instead he's celebrating Confederates and, saying that Los Angeles is a trash heap and, various Democrats should be in jail.
Arlington Cemetery, hallowed American ground, is on the former home of Robert E. Lee. After the Civil War, we said, you don't get your house back. We're going to buy it out of bankruptcy. We're going to use this land as hallowed ground for the soldiers who died, ending your rebellion. This Trump's arch hides those graves and centers the view on Robert E. Lee's house. I think as a architectural piece, it's contrary to American history.
Yeah, and people may recall that Trump, when he was running for re-election in 2024, had showed up with cameras at Arlington National Cemetery, and it was a bit of an incident where they were attempting to film a commercial for him.
I forgot that.
Yeah, and sort of defiled, I think, in many people's view, this place, and that event, was set up by his staff and particularly an event planner. His name is Justin Caporelli. And Justin is the co-owner of Event Strategies, which is the group we were just talking about. And I had mentioned they were hired by America 250. They have also been hired by Freedom 250, and they're organizing most of these events that we're talking about in Washington. And they have various contracts with different federal agencies in addition to set up some of events connected to the celebration, or Trump's version of the celebration.
Well, I'm worried about that for so many reasons. I mean, look, they have an invite list I mean, and we know who it is. Like, I wasn't invited to the ellipse on January 6th. Their invite list is the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, a bunch of white nationalists, a bunch of insurrectionists. So these are the guys who are going to be, we own Washington. We're going to be in our nation's capital to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the country. I mean, this is just, it's appalling to think about.
Yeah, I mean,
Their triumphant return, pardoned and given a slush fund money to pay for your transit.
Indeed. And, I think, some of these events, they'll say, the IndyCar race in Washington, D.C. is open to anybody can show up and watch. But, this is, of course, this is playing to a certain segment of Americans. And I don't think there's nothing inherently wrong with doing that at some point. But, I think we can see pretty clearly that, Trump's base is shrunk and, it's sort of down to his hardcore supporters. And a lot of those supporters are in red states. They tend to be older white people. And I think that, we see this celebration, the way it is being organized, is for his supporters. And it is leaving out, I'll just quickly say, it's leaving out a lot of people. They called it I'm forgetting what they called it, but for around New Year's, there was a projection on the Washington Monument, which was a recounting of American history. And I went and watched, and it was amazing. So it sort of takes you through different themes in American history, but it's basically chronological. And there was no mention of slavery. There was no mention of immigration. There was no mention of, I think, almost any Black person, the experience of Black people in the United States, there was no mention whatsoever of Native Americans in the United States. And perhaps most striking to me, there was no mention of any woman. There was no discussion of, there's Christopher Columbus, was Thomas Edison, George Washington, Lewis and Clark. They talked about AI at the end because of their corporate sponsorship, but they didn't. They couldn't think of any woman to say, "Hey, there's some women who contributed to the history of the United States."
So let's talk about their view of American history. This isn't new. In the last Trump administration, they published the 1776 Project, which was a revolting piece of academic horseshit. Pardon me. Sorry, guys. We'll have to bleep that out. The Biden administration pulled on day one because it was just not who we are and not how we got here and not our history. But that vision is back. And talk about what it is. It's like, okay, it leaves out all these people.
Yeah, it sure does. And, I don't think Trump, I think obviously, he's not interested in sports. He's not interested in history. He's just sort of interested in, I think we all know this, feeling good now and connecting himself to someone who has some resonance for him in the current moment. So that's why he says he likes Andrew Jackson from American history or something like that, because of what Andrew Jackson says in the current culture wars, not because of what Andrew Jackson did about the bank
right. It's not real history.
Yeah. And so there's this vision of American history which is reactionary in a very basic sense. These are people who are reacting against what they see as woke excesses of the way that American history was talked about. And I think a lot, particularly in 2020, when there was the Black Lives Matter movement was at its peak, and there was a lot of reconsideration. The
1619 Project scared them to death.
Yeah. So a lot, and that, of course, the 1776 Project that you mentioned, which is a government program to say, hey, the 1619 program, which is not project, which is a New York Times produced thing, not government funded, but the 1776 Project is just a government funded way of saying, hey, they're wrong about slavery's influence in this country, which is whoever you think is right. Should the government be paying for that? I don't think so. And so, there's this vision of history, which is basically reactionary, but then the way that it's explained is to say, look at all these great, almost exclusively white men who did great things in the United States history. And, people got along and were happy and, conquered some empty land in the west of the United States and had some wonderful wars in which they were very successful. And now we're part of that great tradition. And I think it's basically that simple as they project it. And it's, I think there's many historians right now who are making great cases about how we might take a more complicated look at American history. Jill Lepore in the New Yorker has written a bunch of great articles. But
well, yeah, Jill Lepore is fabulous, and she writes about this a lot.
Yeah.
But what the people in schools are seeing are videos produced by Prager University, which isn't a university; it's a propaganda shop. I mean, and they're branding themselves as scholars and publishing fake history.
Yeah, indeed. PragerU partnered
Hillsdale College, which is
Yeah.
a school.
Yeah. Yeah, PragerU partnered with the White House and Freedom 250, and they've produced these what they call freedom trucks with these little trailers that drive around, and they show videos of and AI generations of founding fathers who are sort of animatronic, George Washington or somebody telling you about what George Washington supposedly thought. As we mentioned, one of our stories, the John Adams version in that they've produced for us, offers the thought that facts don't care about your feelings, end quote. And facts don't care about your feelings is a thing that was said by the conservative commentator Ben Shapiro. It was a little line that he liked to use. So that they have put Ben Shapiro's words into John Adams' mouth, one of the founders of this country. So I think that's an example of the level of history that we're getting from these organizations that you mentioned. Hillsdale College, the head of Hillsdale College, or the historian from Hillsdale College, is in another video produced as part of this celebration, compares Trump, offers an extended comparison of Trump to Abraham Lincoln and how Trump reminds him of Abraham Lincoln.
He reminds me of Abraham Lincoln too, but only in reverse. It reminds me how great Lincoln was to the full extent of the disaster that Trump is trying to undo all of the work that Abraham Lincoln did to redefine America along the lines of the Declaration of Independence, to have this rebirth of freedom that Trump's trying to undo. So I'll welcome that comparison and have that argument every day of the week.
And Abraham Lincoln, by the way, was not mentioned in this video I mentioned that was projected onto the Washington Memorial. No mention.
Really?
And of course, the reason that they didn't mention Abraham Lincoln is because then they would have had to talk about slavery and the Civil War. And
did they mention the Civil War?
No, they did not mention the Civil War. And this gets at what is left out. It's not just black people and women. It's also adversity and pluralism in the way that this country has been formed by conflict and by people who struggled. And
how about labor? Any issue? Any discussion of the role of working people in creating a 5-day work week, an 8-hour day? Anything that that values the work of labor?
There was nothing in that video, and Mary Harris Jones, Mother Jones, was the labor leader, was not mentioned in that video. But however, on the Department of Labor in Washington D.C., along with other federal buildings, there is a big poster or a giant banner, and on it I think it says Freedom 250 in the bottom in little writing, and above it, and there's a big picture of President Donald Trump. So that's the way that the labor movement is being celebrated, is by this president.
I worked many years in countries that aren't democracies, Saudi Arabia among them, and the banners of the leaders are everywhere. Their faces are on every public monument. This is not consonant with our history.
It sure isn't. And again, to go back, and it doesn't have anything to do with our history the way that they're celebrating this. And it's a celebration of Donald Trump and his assertion of his will. He wants to have a UFC fight on the White House grounds on his birthday. Then he's going to do it. He's going to try at least to build a arch in front of Arlington National Cemetery without congressional authorization. He tore down the East Wing of the White House and is proceeding with the construction of his ballroom. So and these are called vanity projects for a reason.
We've talked a bit now about his view of American history and his view of himself in American history, but to tie it together with the moment, all of it is corrupt, right? We have laws about how you're supposed to issue contracts. He issued them to a friend of his that he likes from his club, and it costs taxpayers more. He because they don't go through the process of properly vetting contractors, everything's over budget. So taxpayers, I mean, corruption is a tax. I mean, it's not just the rich making themselves richer at everybody else's expense. It's an actual quantifiable tax on the public. So the way he's gone about celebrating our anniversary is lining certainly his friends' pockets at the expense of American taxpayers. And I mean, there's a piece of that in American history for sure, but not one that we venerate.
Yeah, one piece of it that we see in American history going a little further back is that, he's bringing, they've increased the number of National Guard troops. The National Guard troops remain in Washington, D.C., and they said that they're here to protect us and tourists from all the terrible people in Washington, D.C. That was a prelude to, of course, the dispatch of National Guard and ICE to many cities in that.
Well, to my city, where they paid to send them here, but courtesy of some good lawyering, they never left the military base because they weren't allowed to deploy. Taxpayers paid for that too. It was a whole lot of litigation, but no change on our streets. Instead, we had ICE thugs not protected by the National Guard.
Yeah, and we paid for the tear gas that they shot at protesters in Chicago and Minneapolis, and the bullets that they used to kill people in Minneapolis.
Yeah, here too.
A point worth making is one of the reasons for the Declaration of Independence. In the Declaration of Independence is they quartered troops in our cities without the permission without the agreement of the citizens of that city. And
I'm so glad you brought that up, Dan. I went through this as of reading through all of those points in the Declaration of Independence and seeing which ones applied today, and it's a shockingly large number.
It is, and I think it's not hyperbole to say that the President of the United States and his administration are they're not only not celebrating the ideals of the American Revolution, they're on the wrong side of it. They're celebrating the ideals of King George and the British monarchy more certainly than they're celebrating democracy, freedom, and pluralism, which are ideas that the founders probably, I would argue, would want us to be talking about 250 years later.
Yeah. Well, and they also, our founders, spent an enormous amount of time thinking about how you build governing structures that allow democracy to persist. And there has been no president that's worked harder to undermine those structures than Donald Trump and his party.
Indeed, building an arch in front of Arlington National Cemetery that's way bigger than it ought to be, and without congressional authorization is unpatriotic. It's a violation of the intentions of the people who wrote the Constitution.
Well, look, I've said this before and I'll tell you, I hope he builds the arch, and I hope he builds it because America has a huge deficit. Financial deficit, and that arch will solve the deficit problem because the next president should say, for $10 you get to take one shot at it with a sledgehammer. And Americans will line up from DC to San Francisco for their chance to take a sledgehammer to his arch and pay for the privilege, and we won't have a deficit.
You think the ballroom should be part of that as well?
I think the ballroom, if he builds it, and I don't think he will, I think the ballroom and Mar-a-Lago, the ballroom probably should come down. It's just too big and too gross. But we need to do what after the Civil War we did to Arlington. We need to turn their monuments into memorials. So the ballroom could be the museum of presidential grift. And we could hang the Qatari plane in there along with other things he's stolen, right? And Mar-a-Lago should be the Museum of American Fascism. And we just need to repurpose those symbols in ways that are true to us and our history. And we need to do it with no mercy. We need to do it like they did after the Civil War, like they did to Robben Island in South Africa, like all over Berlin. There are monuments everywhere in the world where people have figured out who we are and who they thought we were, and then showcase the difference. So I know you weren't asking seriously, but my serious answer is if it exists and we don't tear it down, we repurpose it. And it is not a glittering ballroom. It is a place for people to learn about corruption in American politics.
Yeah, well, I understand what you're saying, but I do think, sort of in that spirit, I would just point out, and I'm sure your listeners are aware of this, but we're talking about how sort of awful the celebration of the 250th anniversary in Washington D.C. will be. But there's a whole lot of events going on around the country, and
that are fabulous,
that are great, and there's actually no shortage of ways to sort of think about what this country ought to be about right now that are a little more uplifting than
and I really think, and that's what's going to happen. I think he thought he would do something and it would teach America about America the way he wants us to think. And instead, America is going to celebrate the America we love. And the contrast is going to be so great, it's going to further dig his political grave.
That's I hope so. America 250, the organization, did not cease to exist. They've lost a lot of funding, but they're still out there and they're still promoting state events, and they have a website where people can go look up, some of the local events that are going on. So, that's one way of finding some of this stuff.
Yeah. Well, listen, I really appreciate your reporting. Tell people where they can find it.
Motherjones.com.
All right, everybody. Thank you. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks very much for having me. Have a good one.
Welcome back to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid, on WCPT 820.
Okay, Dean Baker is back. He is the founder of the Center for Economic and Policy Research. He is a writer, an author of books and studies, and prolific on social media. And I think he's also the resident economist on our show because he spends so many Saturdays helping us understand what's going on. Hello, Dean.
Hey, Edwin, thanks for having me back on.
So I'm confused about our economy and where we stand right now. And I am more worried than I've been about a few things, but where are we? We've had some interesting jobs reports and inflation reports. Well, where do we stand?
Well, it's a great question. The economy slowed a lot. It's kind of funny because you hear Donald Trump ranting. I don't know what he knows. I don't think he cares. But, the economy was, as we know, it was doing pretty well under Biden. Things to complain about, to be clear. No one's happy about inflation. No one, prices had gone up a lot with the pandemic, but that had largely come under control, But in any case, we don't have to go back there. Point was the economy was going in the right direction under Biden. The unemployment rate was 4%. Inflation was coming down. That's unambiguous. It's probably a little higher than most of us would have liked to have seen. Wages were outpacing inflation. That's a great story. So for the most part, things look pretty good. The economy is growing about 2.5% a year. Pretty good pace by anyone's, anyone other than Trump, any good pace. But anyhow, since then, we had Trump throw his tariffs on, which had exactly the effect all of us predicted, raised inflation. The exporters didn't eat the tariffs. We all paid more for everything we got from abroad. His mass deportations has slowed job growth and led to higher prices of, a lot of agricultural products because that's where a lot of the people he's deporting work. And then we have the war, which sent gas prices through the roof. Oil prices, electricity prices are rising because of the data center boom. So what we're seeing is slower growth. We're not in a recession, but we had about 1.5% growth in the fourth quarter, 1.5% growth in the first quarter. So that's not horrible, but it's not great. And we know inflation's up near 4%. It's outpacing wage growth. So people are falling behind. So it's not a horrible economy, but it's hard to say it's a great economy. And what has me worried Well, two things that have me worried. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen with the war because, Trump keeps telling us, pieces at hand. You're old enough to remember that line. But, the war is about to end. But that's been true. He's been saying that for over 2 months now. So we don't know what will happen there. The other thing is we have an AI bubble, and I don't feel any qualms about saying that. I've looked at it enough, and I was slow to say that. But I don't think there's any doubt we have an AI bubble. My reason for saying that is that at some point bubbles burst. And when that happens, we're going to see a huge fall in investment because a lot of it right now is going into data centers, other AI-related activity. And then the other thing, all this money in the stock market, a lot of that's going to disappear. And that's going to be bad news for people at their 401ks, and it's going to directly affect the economy because people spend based on the fact they think they have, 500,000 or whatever in the market, and a lot of them are going to find out they have a lot less.
Yeah, that worries me, and I'm worried about this. I took the time to read a speech that a guy named Neil Chapman, who's ExxonMobil's senior vice president, gave at a conference in New York this week. And Dean, he predicted incredible increases in oil and oil-related prices. He warned that commercial inventories of oil and oil-based fuels are really like running out. He said that we and other countries have tapped our strategic what are they called, petroleum reserves and run them down, and that we are just weeks away from a truly catastrophic shortage. And that's even after unsanctioning Russian, Venezuelan, and Iranian oil that had been sitting in tankers. That's now sold, gone, and used. I mean, I understand that's why there's so much pressure on Donald Trump to, sign a deal to put an end to this terrible war. But, he doesn't want to end it on in ignominious defeat. And I hate that. But that looks like what has to happen because, I mean, what could it mean for the global economy if the guy at Exxon is right and the blockade is not lifted in the coming days?
Yeah, a couple points here. First off, just to be clear, it's a little tricky here. So there's two things that go on when we look at the price of oil. One is speculative, just like, if we're looking at, look at the AI stocks. How much is, people are saying that Elon Musk's SpaceX, which is mostly AI, that's his claim, not mine. I mean, you can read his prospectus. It's mostly AI. It's worth $1.6 trillion. Is it worth that? Well, they don't have that today. I mean, that's a bet about what its future profits will be. I think that's nuts. But that, in any case, that's what it is. That's a bet on its future profits. Then there's the question, okay, what price equates supply and demand today? So when we saw the price of oil hit 105, whatever the peak was, 105 a barrel, that was the bet about the future. So people are saying, what's the price going to be in the future? And that's what that bet was. But what Chapman, the CEO, the VP at Exxon was saying, or Chevron, whichever it was saying, what price equates the supply and demand we have at the pumps? Okay, and what he's saying is that that's going to be much higher because we don't have enough oil, and we're going to have to reduce demand on the order of 10 or 15%. And you have to go, how much do prices have to rise? And, you think about that. Think about your own case. Everyone think about their own case. How much would oil prices, gas prices have to rise to get you to cut back your consumption, 10 or 15%? For some people, they don't have a choice. They have their car. They have to go to work, this and that. They're going to be really hard pressed. Now, other people, when the price starts to go up, they'll take mass transit. They'll take fewer trips. There's some room there. But it's going to have to go up a lot if we don't correct that imbalance. And the point that he's making is we've been able to prevent the real shortfall because we've been drawing down our reserves. Our ability to do that ends in a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. He knows the inventories better than I do, but I trust. I've seen other people give that number. And when that happens, we're going to see big rises in prices. And I should point out that's even if we get the blockade over tomorrow, because that oil doesn't get here tomorrow. It gets here, a month from now, 5 weeks from now, 6 weeks from now. A lot of you have wells that have been out of production. Those don't restart the next day. So we're going to see higher prices pretty much no matter what. So the people who think we're somehow going to get back to $3 a gallon gas, they shake on a deal or whatever they're going to do. I imagine they won't shake, but they'll have a deal. It's not going to be the next day. We might see prices start to fall as people go, things are going to straighten out. But the idea that they're just going to tumble back to $3, no way on earth that happens.
And if we get a real shortage, um, to the extent that prices rise to, I mean, he was talking, I don't know, like $150 a barrel prices. What happens? This is going to affect more than my decision about whether to take public transit or not.
Yeah, no, it's a really big deal that we're going to see. People are going to be forced. You're going to have large numbers of people that we're suddenly looking at instead of $4.50 a barrel, $4.50 a gallon gas, maybe 6, 7. This is a nationwide average. Obviously higher in some places. West Coast it's going to be higher. So very high priced gas, diesel fuel also going to go through the roof, so that means higher costs for shipping. Jet fuel will see even further rises in airfares. So this is going to get passed on through the economy. So this is a really big deal for inflation, and that's why we're looking at the numbers that just came out last week, 3.8% year-over-year inflation. We're likely to see that go higher before it goes lower. And again, who knows? Anything could happen with Iran. I don't have any particular insights as to what a deal looks like there. But, it's more likely to go up than down from here.
And you began by saying the economy is still growing, not as fast as it was. But does something like this put enough pressure to stop that growth, to make us go backwards?
It certainly could, because, again, as more of those prices get passed through, there are two big factors here. One, how does the Fed respond? Keep in mind, I was joking about this. I saw a guy kick out of Paul Krugman wrote almost as Krugman doesn't need me to tell him what to write. So I always get a kick when he writes the same thing I do. If he happened to see mine and that prompted him, wonderful. But, he doesn't need me to tell him what to write. But we were both laughing at the same thing. Kevin Warsh got picked by Donald Trump to lower interest rates. His first meeting is in 2 weeks. All the data shows inflation is up. If he votes to lower interest rates, he's going to be the only person on the Fed to vote to lower interest rates. And I checked. There's never been a case where the Fed chair has been in the minority. So just so people who don't know, they have a 12-person open market committee. Fed chair just has one vote of those 12. There has literally never been a case. The Fed was created, I forget, 1912, whatever. It's well over 100 years. Literally never been a case where the Fed chair was in the minority. And in this case, I guarantee if he were to vote to lower interest rates, he'd be in a minority of 1. I don't think he'll do it because it just would be too whacked out. But that's what Trump put him there for. And anyhow, so I was laughing at that. Krugman was laughing at it. Well, you got what you deserve, buddy, But anyhow, so will the Fed raise rates? I think they might. I mean, they might not do it at the June meeting, but they might well do it. And as we get higher rates in the economy, that will slow housing, slow car buying. So that will be a big factor. The other factor I was talking about earlier, the AI bubble. I'm getting my bubbles confused here. I'm too old. But that's going to burst at some point. What people ask me what's going to cause the burst, I go, anything. I can't tell you today. It's been a quarter century later. I don't know what caused the dot-com bubble to burst. It began to collapse in March of 2020. 2000. I don't know what happened. I can't, even after the fact. So, but anyhow, higher prices, higher inflation, maybe a Fed rate hike. That could be the sort of thing that causes the bubble to burst. Something will cause it to burst. I don't know what, but that could be the sort of thing that causes it to burst.
Is there anything you're optimistic about?
Well, not. One of the things with AI, and
you could say the Cubs, but I'm not sure that's relevant.
Hey, I'm a White Sox fan, but I got a big kick out of the fact.
Like I said, you could say the Cubs. They're on a losing streak.
Yeah, I know, but I got the Pope with me on the White Sox. So, but anyhow, I will say I think there is potential with AI, and it's weird how people talk about it because there's all this stuff. It's going to take all the jobs. I don't believe that. I don't think there's nothing we see in the data that supports it. A lot of people have looked at AI much closer than I have. None of them have the story it's going to take all the jobs. But what it will do, I think, is it will increase productivity growth, just as we saw in the 90s with the dot-com boom. We saw productivity growth jump from around 1% to about 2.5% annually. that allows for higher wage growth, better living standards. That's a good story. So there's a lot of bad stories people are saying with AI. Everyone's going to be mass unemployment. I don't think that will happen. Again, a lot will depend how we deal with it. Obviously, the companies aren't looking to give people higher wages, but
Right.
but if we deal with it properly, faster productivity growth means faster wage growth, improving living standards, ideally shorter work, all sorts of good things we could tell. So I think that could happen, but that's not going to be a next month story. This is maybe
Right.
a few years down the road, most likely after Donald Trump's out of the White House.
Am I right that the gap between corporate profits and wage growth has gotten very big?
Yeah, and it's really been striking because, as you know, I follow this closely. If you look, we first began to see the divergence between productivity growth and wage growth around 1980, probably not coincidentally with Reagan being elected. But from 1980 to 2000, it was primarily within the wage distribution. So it wasn't higher corporate profit. So workers, a typical worker wasn't getting it, but higher end workers, the CEOs, the Wall Street types, higher paid professionals, they were getting it. So it was going from your typical worker to the higher end workers. What's happened since 2000 has been a shift from wages to profits. And again, different stories there. Obviously, monopolization is part of the story because we basically have a Justice Department, a Federal Trade Commission that's been asleep, not under Biden. I mean, they were trying to do good things, but they didn't get that far because he wasn't there that long. But, we have seen a shift from wages to profits, and that's definitely been the case in the last quarter century.
Yeah. All right, well, what are Americans spending their money on, and has that changed?
Yeah, well, a lot of it's going to healthcare. That's a big story, often indirectly. So most of us don't pay for most of our healthcare. I'm sure most of us think we pay more than we should. But in any case, most of us have insurance, whether from the government, Medicare, Medicaid, through the exchanges, our employer. So most of our healthcare is paid through the employer, but that indirectly comes out of our pocket, either taxes or if it's an employer, employers aren't giving it to us just because they're nice people. It might be nice people, but they're giving it as part of our pay package, So healthcare definitely more. Housing we've seen big increases in house prices and rents really since the pandemic. I mean, they were somewhat outpacing inflation in the period just before the pandemic, but not hugely so. So the big surge followed the pandemic. I think that will come down, by the way, but that does take time. That doesn't happen overnight. I mean, if we get a collapse of the bubble, people have been asking about that. If we get a collapse of the AI bubble, not the housing, we don't have a housing bubble, but I think that might lead to a fall in house prices. Not necessarily a good story because they'll fall in house prices because a lot of people who had money in the market or whatever, they don't have that anymore. So, so people will be downsizing. Again, maybe that's in principle a good thing, but not the reason we want them to do it. But housing and healthcare have been the two areas where people are spending a much larger share of their money.
And we hear like America's economy depends on consumer spending, and that's the kind of economy we have. But I read something that most of like an enormously large chunk of consumer spending is coming from the very richest people.
Yeah, there's been definitely an increase in the share coming from, say, the top 10% or so. So it's somewhere around 50%. There's some differences on that. We can try and parse the data. I mean, it gets hard because we don't have great data on consumption, partly because, Elon Musk doesn't tell us exactly what he's buying week to week. But that's only partly in jest. I mean, because it comes at the very high end. We don't have good data on what they're spending.
Like, Dean, I don't understand that, right? I don't understand. Like, I know what I spend money on, and I'm not sure I could spend 5 times as much money. What would I buy? I mean, like I only eat so much. I own my house. I mean, like how is it that a tiny number of people can be responsible for that much? I mean, they just buy fleets of jets. What are they? How could they spend that much money?
They buy yachts. They have cars, expensive cars, clothes. These people could spend, thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars on a suit, a dress, jewelry.
Is buying elections part of? Is that count as their spending?
Yeah, that's a good question. Whether that counts as their consumption, I don't. I'd have to think about that. Whether that, the campaign contributions would be generous here.
I mean, like Elon Musk's spending, and when he went to Wisconsin to try and buy a Supreme Court race, and he was offering cash and doing all kinds of things. I guess that's his spending. I guess.
No, it's definitely spending. I'm just thinking of it as a GDP account. Would that count as consumption? I think it would. But it might not be his consumption. So there's a category in the GDP. This is getting nerdy stuff, but there's a category of GDP accounts. So for nonprofits, so that would be everything. The Red Cross and whatever.
Yeah.
It might appear there. So it would be consumption. It might not be listed as wouldn't be Elon Musk personally, but household consumption. It might be nonprofit consumption.
Interesting.
Anyhow, that's more nerdy than any of us has to go into.
Well, every once in a while, you got to water your roots, Dean.
Yeah.
So okay. So we're in this. I mean, we're in this pivotal moment where, if you just had to say, like, the most important thing for our economy in the next 2 weeks is it reopening that strait?
Oh, definitely. I mean, this is. I don't know how ungodly stupid, this war was. I mean, we all know, we go back to 2015, was it, when Obama signed the deal with Iran? And, it's just crazy. They were not getting a nuclear weapon. That deal worked. It was being, Trump is jumping up and down. We can't trust the Iranians. We didn't trust the Iranians. There were international monitors. There were cameras. They weren't enriching uranium. We knew that. But he gets into office and has, because a black guy did it, and I'm going to say that because he's obviously tremendously racist. And he said, okay, we have to get rid of that deal. So 2018, they get rid of the deal. And guess what? Iran starts to enrich uranium because there's nothing to prevent them. And now he's going, we can't let them have a bomb. Well, he he told us last summer, when he did do the massive bombing strikes, that, we totally destroyed their nuclear program, and anyone who says otherwise it's fake news. So now he's fake news because he's saying that they were 2 weeks away from, it's utter nonsense. They weren't 2 weeks away last summer. They certainly weren't 2 weeks after they bombed their facilities. They were not in a position to build a bomb anywhere soon. So it's great. We don't, I don't want to have a bomb. I don't know anyone who wants them to have a bomb, but we didn't have to do this war. And it was not a well thought out strategy. I gather, I take him as word. They thought that in 4 days that the regime would capitulate and they'd come begging for mercy. Clearly that didn't happen. And it's not about to happen. So anyhow, it was very harebrained. He's saying none of the experts thought that they would block the straits. You go, no, actually, everyone knew.
Every expert,
and even a lot of people. I was no expert. I mean, it was kind of an obvious thing to do. Like, why would they not do it? You're literally saying you want to put them out, their regime out of existence. What do they have to lose? So yeah, and it's been disastrous. So getting the straits open again really is the most important thing for our economy and the world economy. The other point, which is obvious one, that they're totally screwing our allies who, needless to say, are not happy about this. They didn't start the war. They weren't consulted, and they're more dependent on oil from the region than we are, which Trump boasts about. But that doesn't make them happy in Japan and Korea and the other countries who, suddenly have this massive oil shortage.
All right. Well, Dean, as always, I learn a lot from our conversations. Those of you who are listening who haven't figured this out yet, follow Dean on social media. Look up the Center for Economic and Policy Research. I know economics aren't for everybody, but they really are about everybody. So it's worth getting, paying attention.
Oh, thanks. And thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
As always, Dean, except for the White Sox part, I think it's a great conversation. Take care. Take care.
I got the Pope with me, so you too.
Yep. All right, guys, we take a quick break, and your calls when we come back.
Welcome back to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid, on WCPT 820.
Okay, folks, 773-763-9278. 773-763-9278. I'm taking your calls, and Jim, kick us off.
Edwin?
Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the buzz. Anyway, great show today, Edwin. I've just put myself in the shoes of a person in one of these GEO group prisons who we're paying for dearly in our taxpayer dollars. Now, when you're in a prison like that, the biggest weapon that a sadist has is suspense. Once you're in there, you don't know how long you're going to be in there. You don't know why you're in there. They'll just tell you you're illegal. And when you're in a state of suspense like that, or wherever, you don't know if you're going to be, banished or killed or whatever the case may be. But that is just a terror tactic that is unacceptable in the United States of America. I mean, Hitchcock used it in his movies. Suspense was great in a Hitchcock movie, and that was part of the success of his movies was suspense. But as a human being incarcerated, and you have no way of knowing where you're going or how you're going, if you've got a couple $100 stashed somewhere, you can't get to it. I mean, it is just inhumane. And just think of it. We're talking about tax returns. Now, Trump's beefing about his tax returns. Well, they were leaked already. He paid $750 in 2016, $750 in 2017. You saw Biden's tax returns and his wife. They were over $150,000. This guy's paying $750 for tax returns. No wonder we're in this kind of trouble because, and then he passes a bill where we can't even tax these buggers. So anyway, I agree with you today. I mean, we're going to get it back. We're going to get it back for sure. But
we're going to get it back. Yep.
Yeah, we're going to get it back. And the point is, let's be cogent about just the idea of what America is. And I agree. The whole show is about that today. What is America really about? And how great a nation we have. And, we've got to get it back. And Edwin, you have a great weekend. Thanks for taking my call, Edwin.
As always, thank you. And Jim, you talked about Donald Trump's tax returns were leaked. They were, and that was illegal. And it was when Joe Biden was president that somebody was arrested, charged, and convicted for leaking those tax returns. So all this BS about weaponization of justice, because that happened, Biden's Justice Department did its job. And now we're seeing what happens when it doesn't. 773-763-9278. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Edwin. Thinking about all this and the 250th anniversary, my first thought is at some point I want to erect a monument that's called the Trump Dump, and I want everything that he's erected, just a big pile. And I think just leave it that way. That would be fine, and we'll put that in some federal district in, say, Florida. I think would be a good place for it, all of his dump. Other than that, I don't want to see it. I think every bit of it should be torn down. His ballroom, and by the way, is there anybody in his group of thug cronies that can dance a step? I mean, a ballroom about 100,000. What is 100,000 square foot ballroom for people who couldn't dance a step? I mean, I don't think any of them can. So it's just ridiculous.
Are you referring to that video that's circulating of Pete Hegseth?
No, I can't see things like that, but I guess there is something like that out there.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
I just it doesn't. No, and what it takes actually to do any ballroom dancing or ballet or whatever, which I did when I was younger. I just like, what do you guys need this for? I mean, but I have to say this is that as upset as I get about this monster and the humiliation, the national humiliation that we suffer, and I get angry. I guess I think I feel that way because I feel powerless. Me personally, feel powerless to do anything about it. And I have to think that there are lots of people out there who are a lot smarter than I am, who are equally, if not more, upset about what's happening here, who are not powerless and can do something about it. And I mean all over the world. It's got to be the case that not only in this country, but smart people all over the world are making plans for how they will prevent anything like this from happening again. That one narcissistic pig can do this to the entire world. Can't happen again. Can't.
Yeah, I hope not. I mean, history is full of terrible things happening in the world because of terrible leaders who take power and use it for bad things. But you're not completely helpless. Alone, you're helpless. All of us uh, are in that boat, feeling betrayed by our government, by the crowd that's taken power. But together, we are far from helpless. And we are proving that all over the country. We have to shed our view that we are alone and start to look around at the others who are lifting the country up with us and find that that burden does not fall alone on your shoulders or mine or anybody else's who's listening, but we share it. And together, there are millions and millions of us. And we are more powerful than all their money and that all of and even the machinery that they have lobbed against us. And we're turning the tide. I mean, you think about the law, and you were as disgusted as anybody when Donald Trump said, settled a deal with himself and got his slush fund. But now the good judge is opening up that case again and saying, you know what? I'm sorry, no, you don't get to settle it this way. And perhaps we will take our time and study this carefully. You don't spend a dime, but perhaps this is all fraud, which of course it is.
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
Don't you think that our world leaders, as you were just talking with your last guest, when all of this stuff has happened with Iran and the Strait of Hormuz and the oil that other countries, the leaders of these other nations, many of whom are our allies, I think our Western allies, they are all talking about how, I'm sorry, that if the United States is going to be this unreliable for a period of time, probably a generation, they're going to have to say, look, we are going to have to solve things. They're not going to do nothing. Those are people that I also think of as my allies in this fight too.
No, the era of American leadership is over, and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Because it was so good for us. And by and large, not completely, but by and large, the world was better for it. But now he's still threatening Greenland. He may go to war in Cuba. He's this mess that's messed up the whole world in Iran has to be solved quickly, and there is no good solution. And no one's going to bail him out here. He's done this damage to all of us. So I agree with you. The rest of the world is going to find a way to protect itself from the United States, and that is heartbreaking.
Yeah, those people, those are our allies in this fight too. Is that unfortunately I feel like our traditional allies in the West are going to have to say no. They are. In other words, they're going to have to hold us accountable, and that's what we deserve. As a nation who put this kind of a leader, we deserve to be held accountable. Everyone deserves to be held accountable. And so I think they are going to do something. And you know what? Maybe it leads to, if you take, I'm not always the optimist, but, maybe this will cause people to say, look, maybe there are other alternatives than having our lives run by oil and these kinds of conflicts that can really disrupt things. Maybe that'll happen.
Maybe. I think I think a better future is available to us when we get through this moment, and we have to get through it. But the way we do that is, together. Anyway, Paul, thanks so much. Appreciate it as always.
Yep. Take care.
All right. 773-763-9278. Greg, what's on your mind?
Yeah. Good afternoon, Edwin. Thanks for taking the call.
Of course.
Hello?
Yes.
Still there? Okay. Yeah. The reason I called today is I've talked several times on Jones' show. I call in once a week anyway, but I listen every day. I listen to your show on the weekends. But the one thing that I've always thought about, and I've expressed it several times over the years, 2 years anyway, is that are you a Tom Clancy reader? Do you know of Tom Clancy's books?
I do. I'm not. It's not my genre, but I have read some, and I've seen the movies, and I think he's very talented.
Okay, he's dead also. But
Yeah.
If you understand his books, and basically there's this group of people in our government that is what I would call the deep state. I mean, and I don't think there's anything wrong with the deep state. The deep state is there to protect what I believe is what over in England they refer to as the realm. Okay, but what I think of is it protects the Constitution and our way of life, our government, and that was what it was set up to look at international threats, and then the CIA, the FBI had their areas. Okay, now. No one like Trump comes in and just dismantles that overnight. And I can't suspend my disbelief, that all this, I mean, it's fiction, sure. But at some point, you got to believe there was a deep state and that they wouldn't allow this to happen unless they're in on it. Okay, but that's all I'm going to say about that. I got one more point to make if I could. And that's
Sure, go ahead.
can I make my point?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. My point is this that I wanted to make with current times here with Trump and all his projects, his art projects, his architectural projects. I'm concerned when he starts doing things like tearing things up and not finishing them, and he's got all these no bid contracts. I'm worried that this guy is going to come in and under the cover of the 4th of July and the big celebration, he's going to destroy everything. He's going to come in and you're going to have tanks that he's allowed to get there under the nose of everybody because they think, oh, that's just Trump. And then they're going to start destroying the White House, the Capitol, and everything else. Far-fetched? Let's find out. But at least put it out there for people to start talking about it, because maybe if these jerks like the Bug-Eyed Patel, if he at least starts getting that the American people are in on this stuff and they know his plan, maybe they'll say we got to back off. No way, I know, but that's all I had to say.
Okay, Greg, I appreciate it. And let me just, the one thing I would say in response, only this. I don't believe that's going to happen, but even if he did, I mean, they bombed Iran brutally and really destroyed a lot of things. And yet the Iranians are still there and still capable of extracting a lot of pain from us. And you know what? The American people are as tough as the Iranians. Donald Trump, if he destroys the White House, if he destroys the Capitol, if he does all of that stuff, he is not going to destroy the American people. And what he's going to find is that those symbols, as important as they are not our country. Our country is our people, and we will not put up with it.
But how do we know, with a big country like Iran, how do we know that all this stuff we're being fed? And remember, there's no real reporters over there anymore, and this is all being done from the air and everything. How do we know what real damage was done? I don't believe.
Yeah, okay, I hear you. I hear you. We don't really, but we do know that we split in a lot of bombing. I'm sure, and those bombs are we know our military is very capable. Anyway, thank you, Greg. I appreciate it.
All right. Yep. Bye.
Naomi, you're next. Naomi?
Mm-hmm.
Hi there.
Yes. Hi.
You are on the radio, Naomi.
Oh, okay. Edwin, how are you?
Thank you. I'm good.
Good. I'm enjoying the show. I had a little idea, and I wanted to run it by you. I'm really concerned about the debt that we're accruing, and individual debt as well as national debt. And I was trying to think of a way to access it. What we could do to prevent him. I was thinking maybe we could seize assets. I don't know, but anyway. But I did have a thought. I thought maybe in a way it's kind of good that we're going to go bankrupt. You know why? Because then when we take the House and the presidency and the Senate, we can tell the Republicans that we need to not fund the military at all. We don't have money now, and we don't need an excuse anymore. And because they robbed us. What do you think?
So what are you suggesting we do with the military?
We don't need a military. We don't need to fund a military.
I see. Cut defense spending. Sure. We can,
completely.
Sure.
That's my idea, but I mean,
no, it's a fine. Even that won't be won't make us whole quite away. We do have to make sure that the wealthiest Americans pay their fair share of taxes. That must happen. They have not been doing so, and we have tilted the economy in favor of the wealthiest in our tax policy and other policies. We have to fix that, and there's also, as I said, I think before, maybe not on this show, I need to say it again. There's a word all of Americans are going to get to know, and it's called disgorgement, and that is right. That's when we make them give up their ill-gotten gains. All of that's coming. Thank you, Naomi. Where are you, Naomi? Where are you calling from?
Santa Monica.
Oh, great. That's right.
California.
Thank you. Yep.
Yeah,
we talked before. Yep. Thank you. All right. Aris, you're next.
Yes. Aris Yanabus, 88 years old, many years lawyer here in Lincoln Square, and my favorite city, Chicago. But what I'd like to on two issues, a gentleman a few minutes ago talked about the deep state. See, I know who the deep state is. Nobody else knows because they have not read a book by Ferdinand Lundberg, Chicago-born famous author, in 1937 wrote the book, America's 60 Families. And he starts all the way from Rockefeller down to Marshall Fields of Chicago. Now, these people, they are invisible. You never see them. They never talk in the mass media. And also, they are immortal because after 7 generations of Marshall Fields and the other plutocrats, you never see their death in the obituary page of the Tribune or the New York Times. So this is the real deep state. They're omnipotent, but they're also invisible. And nobody talks about them. They talk about the billionaires. These people are now trillionaires.
Okay. Well, Garris, I appreciate your. Are you still in Lincoln Square?
I'm living here happily with my wife. I met her here and we stayed here. And
that's great. I have a daughter who lives in Lincoln Square, so I'm happy to hear that.
Oh, well, we love Chicago and especially Lincoln Square. I got a beautiful house over here.
Nice.
In Catalpa. And the other thing I want to point out is, having bought my first car when I come out of the Army in 1963, the gasoline was 29 cents a pound, and the oil companies were making millions and billions of dollars then. And now, here's my question. These people do not pay taxes. They raised the charge of a gallon from, let's say, $3 to $4 and now up to $5. But the thing is, they had to buy, back in 1963 when I bought my first car in Chicago, they had to buy gasoline from the oil-producing countries. Now, they have killed Saddam and taken the vast oil reserves of Iraq. They killed in Libya. They killed Gaddafi of Libya, and then a few months ago they took the oil wealth of South America of multi-billion dollars. Venezuela. So these people now, they do not have to pay to buy the oil, and they should, if they were good people and honest patriots, they would charge only $1 a gallon for oil, and they'll still be rich. So this is just a fake excuse.
I don't see it quite that way, but I'm glad you had a chance to tell everybody what you think, and I appreciate your being part of this conversation. Thank you, Eris.
Thank you.
Cece, you're next. I'm going to try and get 2 more callers in. Cece, what's on your mind?
I'll make it short.
I'll make it short. I would like to know when we are going to start doing programs discussing, interviewing senators on the subject of the Glass-Steagall Act or the Anti-Monopoly Act that was so crudely disappeared by our friend Bill Clinton.
Okay, so hang on. Let's just so everybody knows Glass-Steagall prevented. Boy, this is going to test my memory. Glass-Steagall prevented commercial and investment banks from. It separated banking into different kinds of entities, and you couldn't do all of it. You couldn't have these gigantic banks doing all the things they do. And in the 90s, America. Go ahead.
That's not the right act. The Glass-Steagall Act prevented monopolies in any field in the United States. What we have now is a monopolized oil conglomerate. Basically, there's three guys who get together in a room and they can set the price of everything oil. So what we need is to take. Somebody should read the bill, update it for modern times, and get that baby back on the floor, because it is seriously the only way we're going to prevent the constant battles we have to have with the oil giants. Who are
the Antitrust Act, which I think is the Sherman Antitrust Act, and it was updated. But regardless of what the laws were, we have a huge problem with consolidation. And the president and his minions in Congress like it. When Biden was in office, he appointed Lena Khan to lead the FTC, and we used the laws to try and fight this consolidation against enormous opposition. And didn't take the time to explain to Americans why it's so important. That's going to have to happen going forward. I couldn't agree with you more, Cece. Could not agree with you more.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right. And let me I'm going to read. Oh, that's too bad. I wanted to talk to somebody named Andy Sherry. All right, everybody. Look, it's been a wild ride, right? In just 1 month, we went from, the terrible pain of seeing the Voting Rights Act torn up, and the consequences of which we're living with, of racist maps being drawn yet again in the South, and a corrupt president, doing corrupt things like self-dealing himself $2 billion to pass out to the very people who were part of that insurrection on January 6th. This happened, this month, for gosh sakes. And yet during this time, what's happened are all the things that we talked about, and I told you would happen. We learned to fight back, and now we are fighting back. And in courtrooms, in grand jury rooms, on the streets, in the media, in our conversations with each other, we are saying we are done with these people, done. And the polling this is not just, the collapse of Donald Trump's polling numbers isn't because Democrats loathe him anymore. That was off the charts, last January. It's because people who are persuadable, and there are more than you think, are looking at the data and looking at their lives and going, this terrible president is lining his own pocket and leaving us worse off. And this Iran war is the worst thing that's ever happened in our foreign policy. And I don't say that lightly. The Iraq war was terrible and created chaos for a generation in that part of the world. And a lot of Americans lost their lives, and trillions of dollars were spent, and our budget was hammered by that. But this chaos, this thoughtless use of the military now, where we've given Iran not a nuclear weapon, but perhaps an economic weapon that's more powerful, the ability to open and close the most important waterway on the planet in terms of energy. They are much stronger. We are much weaker because of Donald Trump. Whatever lies he tells to try and get out of this mess, the reality has arrived. And it's not like me to be quoting a major leader of ExxonMobil, but they know how much oil is sitting where. And when he says we are about to have a serious shortage, if we don't get the oil flowing this in the next couple of weeks, this is a real disaster for everybody. And that's Donald Trump's. And what is he doing when we have this disaster? When we have these enormous challenges in front of us? He is whining that he has to take his name off the Kennedy Center. He is whining that he will headline his own birthday party because he's more talented than all the performers in the world who are turning their back on him. This is our president. This is the president that thinks he's going to save everything, that thinks America is back on his watch. America is on its back on his watch. But we, the people everywhere, are going to turn out as we have again on the next No King's Day. We're going to show up and look at each other, laugh with each other, see the grand spectacle that is this great, diverse, and strange nation of ours. And just know that the one thing that truly unites us, the one thing, apart from our common decency, is this idea that we have that somehow together we can make a better place. Somehow together we can make a better place. And that faith is going to kick these guys out of office in November and kick them out again 2 years after that. But we have to be vigilant, as I know you are. I will talk to you next week. It was a pleasure to get through this very difficult month together. Take care.